6 staff members with us as well, actually 7. But with that being said, I just want to talk a minute before I turn this over to Gary, because I know he's going to talk and talk and talk, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that to be mean, ladies and gentlemen. I'm saying that because once he gets on a roll, boy, he gets going. So I am so happy I can have the microphone before I surrender it. But anyway, strategic planning, I got to share just a little bit of history, and counselors have heard this before, but I'll bore them with it again. But for the viewing public, as we are live streaming this today, the strategic planning workshops and the strategic planning priority-based budgeting that we came out with, the first year I was the mayor, City Supervisor Gary Riedner and I talked this over, actually one time when we were down in Boise for the winter conference, right after I became the mayor. And we had discussed it. And strategic planning, what this did, ladies and gentlemen, it took the place of, we had a very cumbersome, clumsy policy of goal setting before. And it wasn't that it was bad. The problem was it just never got anything done and didn't do it in a strategic way. And so we changed this to strategic planning, priority-based budgeting. And it's worked very, very well. And with that being said, we get counselors involved, and we have one of these workshops, and we can go over the various criteria. So we're on, I guess this would be our 8th year of starting. We talked about it. Took a few years to get it implemented, Gary, but then once we got it going, everybody's embraced it. And so it's worked out wonders since what used to be a yesteryear from the old goal setting that was kind of a funky sort of thing. But anyway, I'm excited about that. With that, Gary, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And Mayor and Council, thank you very much for participating in what used to be the very first step in our budgeting process. Our goal setting typically, as the Mayor indicated, we used to engage in a goal setting process. I want to talk a little bit about how we first started, and then it'll be sprinkled throughout this presentation. We first started strategic planning to do our first strategic plan in 2002. And that mission statement that you see on the wall hanging in our council chambers, you'll see it again in just a moment, was developed that year. It was a joint, we had a facilitator out of Boise, and we had the mayor, council, and senior staff took a day to develop that mission statement. It's been looked at every year since. We ended up with 7 strategic initiatives that year, but we only accomplished 1. And that one was to review our compensation plan to make sure that we were competitive with people in other entities in our market. The other 6 portions of the plan were things to make plans. And I have a slide a little later in my presentation that we had very few comprehensive plans. We had a comprehensive land use plan, but we did not have any comprehensive development plans, didn't have comprehensive departmental plans, capital improvement programs, any of that stuff. So we embarked on a process over the next 12 or 13 years to develop those plans, and we did. I think usually at council orientation, I lay them all out on my desk just to show the council all the things, the long-range planning things that guide what the city does. So we spent quite a while working on those plans so we could end up strategic planning, which we engaged in starting in 2014 and 15, and then our first year was 2016. So if you look on the screen, the mission statement, same as what you see on the wall. It bears repeating. The City of Moscow delivers quality municipal services while ensuring responsible use of resources. We anticipate and meet the needs of our diverse population in order to build public trust and enhance a sense of community. And that statement is just as valid today as it was back in 2002, and it continues to guide staff's approach to issues in the city. Most of the staff has it printed on the back of their business card. So I always tell them, if you have an issue that's confronting you, first look at the mission statement. If what your proposed action is in conformance with that mission statement, then you're doing the right thing. Okay, values are a little bit different than mission. And values are things that go a little bit behind the mission. So we want to be as efficient as we can. You'll see the value statement talks about that. we want to make sure that we don't become just a bureaucracy, that we're more worried about efficiency and efficacy than we are about the people that we serve. So we look at having the best employees possible, deliver the best services we can, and above all, we're looking at serving our community. So through communication, collaboration, you'll notice as we go through the strategic plan, a lot of what we talk about is working with others. A lot of what we talk about is serving with integrity, that we want to make sure that we treat partnerships as a two-way street so that we can further the entire community's goals, not by having siloed approach, but by working together. And any of you have heard the mayor talk during his administration. One of the first leads he always takes is that the partnership with the University of Idaho, Latah County, Moscow School District, City of Pullman, and others is foremost in the city's moving forward, if you will. So that's values. Timeline we just talked about. In the modern era, we'll call it. 2014, we all got together with a consultant out of Boise by the name of John Luthi. And John has been a strategic planner for many years. He teaches strategic planning, and he made a presentation to City Council. Council liked it. His approach was that the council sets the policies. Council is the conscience of the community. Council also hires the best people they can in order to have the boots on the ground to get the work done. So he referred to those as subject matter experts, and all the staff you see in the gallery and on the Zoom today are subject matter experts. They should know what they're doing technically much better than I do as city supervisor or you do as policymakers. So their job is to make sure it's done correctly, but also to pass that message up. Let us know what's going on, let you know what's going on so you can make policy decisions in the best interests of the community. So Luthi's approach was, instead of having what Art would call highfalutin statements, you look at what is challenging you from becoming what you want to be. So you've got your vision, you've got your mission, but there are some things that hold us back. And we kept this process of continuing to distill down and reduce all of these questions to what actually is what are our biggest issues? What is challenging us? Is it a lack of revenues? Is it a lack of public participation? Is it a lack of transparency? All of those things. So throughout our strategic plan, you'll see these issues sprinkled and how we've approached those. And then it's a cascading effect. You set your major challenge areas, then you have issues below that it keeps coming down to. Council sets the major challenge areas. Staff then is charged with implementing strategies that will reduce those major challenge areas or get rid of them. And so you've got issues, and in your books you have this huge report that has not been updated as much as it should be. In this time of COVID, it has, like everything else, probably not been as fastidious at keeping it up, but you can see that there is a lot of progress and many completed areas from our initial strategic planning session. So if you look at those annual updates, they were kind of clunky to start with, so we did what we always do. We looked at the best way to get a program to help us with that. So the Invisio program is what you see in your backup. And it's fairly clear. It tells you at what process we are in any of the issues. If they're in the green, that means that they're on schedule. If they've been disrupted, it's red. And if they're blue, they're completed. So that gives you kind of a key how to read that. And they have places for narratives. And those narratives are things that, frankly, staff can do a better job at updating. And we will look at that again. But as it is, you can see that a lot of progress has been made. So that brings us to today, the strategic planning workshop. Last year we had a workshop that was focused on, it was one of our years that we look at, okay, what is facing the community that isn't already within our major challenge areas? And last year the council looked at two new major challenge areas that they wanted staff to flesh out the issue and then bring it back for your consideration. Those two we'll get to in a few moments, but they have to do with affordable housing and with climate change. So we'll talk today a lot about those two issues and if the council wants to officially include those as MCAs. And then we will then do what we do as staff, which is develop a budget, allocate resources in accordance with council's direction. So, if you look at the driving forces and trends behind the strategic plan, I won't go through all of these, but it talks about what are the big issues. Revenues are always a big issue, and Moscow is challenged. If you've ever heard me in the budget presentation, which all of you have, we have a lot of challenges here. We have a pretty low tax levy rate. We also have a lot of property that is in public hands, so it's non-taxable. So we have our issues as far as revenues, but we've managed to do some things to step around those, such as have a very active grants program, collaborate with others, try to get the most bang for our buck, and be as efficient as possible. Therefore, we have a smaller staff than most cities our size. As Tyler Palmer says, we punch above our weight class. We like to think we encourage innovation and initiative, and that seems to help us compete on a more level playing field. University of Idaho enrollment, it's our biggest employer. As the University of Idaho goes, the city of Moscow follows, albeit maybe a little behind, but their enrollment is huge, and that was a part of the original strategic plan, is how can we assist the University of Idaho in increasing that enrollment to the health of the institution. And then unemployment. When this strategic plan was developed, we had just come off, we were just starting an upswing after the so-called Great Recession of 8, 9, and 10. You'll recall those days, they weren't so different from where we are today. We had wage freezes, we had, for a couple of years, we had partial CPI increases, so our compensation program stuttered a little bit. We ended up catching up in the next couple of years, but the Great Recession had a lot of bad things that happened, a lot of devaluation of property, which, as we'll talk about in the affordable housing issue, has not translated to lower property values at this time. So we're coming off of that, and the city is overall, as an institution, is in a very stable environment at this time. And then, of course, COVID-19. We've all lived for the last 11 months in the shadow of the pandemic. It's one of those situations where we try to continue to prioritize, but there is no getting around that COVID-19 has been a shadow over a lot of our operations and have taken a lot of resources to combat. So those are driving forces and trends. We have desired legacies as well. And these, again, I won't read through all of them. You all have it in your packet. Has to do with what makes us a good city and makes us a good community. We added one this past year, and that would be the last one: responsible stewardship of the public's financial and environmental resources. Again, this is in keeping with the city's mission statement and also in keeping with those the direction that we got last year, looking at affordable housing, looking at climate change. So trying to keep these as relevant as possible. City priorities, as the council directed. The first is economic development. We want to make sure that we are healthy economically. And that does not mean, if any of you were around when we all went through the new cities exercise about 15 years ago, there's a statement made that you don't want to chase smokestacks. You want to have sustainable development that will sustain your community, but also is responsible development. So economic development has to be thoughtful. Facilities and infrastructure, that focuses, you can't listen to the legislature every year without somebody saying our bridges are all past their useful life, our roadways are not in very good shape, so on and so forth. That is the same thing that cities and counties are faced on a smaller scale. I doubt we will ever have enough money to keep the roadways in as good a shape as our street department would like. It's a prioritization, a certain amount of triage, and a lot of preventative maintenance. Certainly, we want to make sure that we don't have catastrophic failures. And all it takes is, if you remember when F Street's pavement was floated off because we had a water main break, that was a case of a catastrophic failure that we just cannot afford to have. Revenue and resources, we know that it costs a lot of money to deliver public services. And typically, our taxing authority or our revenue rate authority lags behind the cost of living. So we're constantly at that situation where we're trying to do the best we can. However, we'll never have just a open pocketbook to do things. Equipment, we want to make sure that we have equipment so that our staff can do the best job possible. It is, as we report every year, our largest operational cost is our personnel, so that's why we're so careful before we propose additional personnel to council. So if we can do it better by means of equipment, or do it become more efficient by means of software, we will bring those to you with a cost-benefit analysis so we can, again, can get the most out of our fairly scarce public dollars. Programming and planning, these are things that you're sitting here today to try and make sure that we're getting the most out of what we've got, that we're looking at things strategically, not just, boy, wouldn't it be great to do that, but yeah, it'd be great to do that. Now develop a plan to get there, and then put your resource allocation in a way that you can achieve that, and that's what this whole strategic planning is about. Customer service. Customer service is job one in what we do. There are times when our customers don't always like what is being proposed, but there are also reasons for that. We'll look at a couple of those as we look at stormwater. We look at property owner tenant, which is something that will come before the council tonight. Again, not everyone likes what the proposal is, but there is a reason for it, and that's ultimately better customer service for the most customers possible. These are the plans that I talked about a few moments ago. If you look at all those hash marks up there, those are all of the comprehensive and facilities plans, transportation plans, sanitation, sewer. We even have a downtown revitalization plan. We've got lots of plans, and these are not things that sit on a shelf. We'll talk about, the apple of my eye at the moment is the capital improvement plan down there in the lower left-hand corner, and that is because the way that we used to do capital is we would try to get grants. We would, if we had funds left over from the previous year, we would put those in an account so council could make some headway on a capital expenditure the next year. But we never did have the money or the planning capacity, if you will, to put money away every year specifically for a project. It seemed like if we were trying to balance the budget, that's the first place where money was taken, was, well, we can delay this project or we can do this. There's still, as I indicated, resources are fairly scarce. Those of you who remember when we built College Street a few years ago, and we did it by taking money that had previously been earmarked for Mountain View Road. So we reallocated it, and then we had to take some money from Mountain View Road to help out with A Street so we could finally get that project done this last building season. So that sort of chess playing, I guess, taking your resources, applying them to where you can get the most bang for your buck, we continue to have to do. It isn't like we've got scads of money to fill up our coffers with. So you'll see a lot of that strategic movement of funding. Strategic planning terms. We talk about major challenge areas versus issues. Major challenge areas are defined by the city council. The council says these are things that we want you to work on. These are things that are keeping us from achieving our goals. Staff, go ahead and present us with plans to reduce these, make them less challenging for us, and we call those issues. And issues are the big thick report you've got are all the issues and sub-issues and strategies employed by staff in moving these things forward. You'll see in those issues and strategies, you'll see a lot of blue hash marks on those, because you can attack something like that, and if it isn't institutional, if it's something that can be addressed, we address it, get it out of the way, and move on to the next issue. So there are certain questions that we ask when we're looking whether something should be included in the strategic plan or when you're making decisions. Number one, does it deal with an issue that is part of the strategic plan? If it doesn't, then you have to ask further questions. Either that or you dismiss it out of hand, but I'm assuming it's probably a pretty good issue, or else council wouldn't be talking about it. So is it an emergency or a critical opportunity? There are things that come up that are emergencies. If you are faced with a COVID-19 pandemic, obviously that takes priority. The safety of the community takes priority. Then you have things that are critical opportunities. We've been faced with critical opportunities a couple of times. Council authorized the purchase of the Haddock building, which came up. We had planned to revamp and remodel the police station on 5th Street, and because the Haddock building came up, it made sense and actually will turn out to be a cost savings for the city. That is a critical opportunity. So do you have the ability to react to that? And as you know, we brought that to council. Council gave us direction, and we moved for that opportunity. Has the situation in our business changed since the development of strategic plan? This is more of a private business type question, but it bears review in the public sector as well. Are there things that we do and don't do? Things that we did do when the strategic plan was developed that we don't do now. A great example of that is the library. We had a vote back in the 90s whether to form the Moscow Free Library District and for the city to get out of the library business. And at that time, the vote was such that, yes, the library district was formed. The library district, actually, the city leases the Carnegie Library and the addition to that library district. So that changed our business. We're no longer in the library business. We will collaborate, provide services, but our business changed a little bit. And lastly, does the issue meet the criteria set in the mission statement? And as we talked about, if it doesn't fit in your mission statement, chances are that it's extraordinary and probably not something that we should be looking at. This is a busy, busy slide, and it just talks about how do we assess these? Once those questions from the previous slide are reviewed, we look at the issues that are identified. Then we develop a comprehensive issue statement, which takes quite a while, actually, as you start to move through it, to develop. 6 months to a year. That is what we've been doing with the climate change issue that was suggested last year or directed last year, as well as housing. We'll go into those a little later. So when we look at priority rankings, we look at the impact, the magnitude, the pervasiveness, threat level, frequency. Is it short-term or long-term? And is the issue controllable? If it's not controllable, what do we do about it? Do we have to seek outside sources, other collaborations, those sorts of things? There are things that are financially overwhelming, and one of them that is being wrestled with right now is a possible surface water containment for addressing our water issues here in the city and in the community. That is a huge issue. It's, I believe, Tyler, about $80 million or something like that. It's going to need a collaboration with state resources, perhaps federal resources, because there's just no way that we locally can raise that kind of money. But is it an issue that we need to be concerned about? Absolutely, and it's contained in our MCAs. Lastly, is it a function of the city? Obviously, providing water to our constituents and our ratepayers, absolutely, that's a function of the city. There are other things that fall in the gray areas, such as human services. And I use that term fairly broadly, but we don't provide medical services or funding for medical services, as does the county, the federal government, and the state. However, there are situations where the council will want to be involved, such as support for the sojourners, for instance, or community sort of functions like that, which are things the city could do if it wanted to, and larger cities often do. But we are small enough and our resources are slight enough that we don't really have the funding to take those on fully. So these are our successes, and this is a slide that you don't have, but I will get it to you. Worked with Jen on identifying all of the successes that we've had over the years, and they're contained in the completed successes in your notebooks. But as you can see, there are a whole bunch. There are some large ones up here. For instance, the deteriorating substandard building in vulnerable, unsafe location. Those of you who've been around long enough know that's the descriptor of the police station on 5th Street. So council decided to move forward. The mayor took it as a personal challenge to go out and educate the community about what was going on and to pass a general obligation bond to build a new police station that's currently being constructed on South 95.
Gary, I'd like to make a quick comment. You look at these strategic planning successes, and that just shows you the importance of this strategic planning process, and in fact, it is working for us. And so keeping on this and moving forward every single year and reorganizing it is a must. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in because it has been very successful for us.
Thank you. So again, I'll get that to you. There's a lot of stuff in there, and some of it are things that would have happened, frankly, without the strategic planning process. But what it does is it makes it so you can leap off from that success and do something else. So that's a great thing. Okay, these are our current major challenge areas now. There's some of them that aren't there anymore because they are completed or they're on their way to being completed. So we'll go through these. The first one is completed. It was a priority one, and priority one are the highest priority for the city council. So we address those as much as we can within our means as soon as we can. The general obligation bond addressed the police station. If you look just below that, inadequate radio infrastructure. We're still being bedeviled by inadequate radio infrastructure, and the reason is that it's about a $2.2 million undertaking, and without any dedicated funding to do so. Back after 9/11, there was funding for interoperability of radio and communications infrastructure. Those funding vehicles have largely dried up over the years. We're being faced with some technology challenges that I'm sure Jesse and Chief Fry and Chief Nickerson would love to talk to you for hours about, but it has to do with bandwidth and what capacity there is and how expensive dual band radios are, so on and so forth. So again, we just completed a engineering study in order for us to move ahead. The engineering study was 300 pages long, something like that. So it's not exactly fairly dry if you're not a radio guy, but it doesn't take away the issue. And the issue is we have dead spots. We have areas where communications are not great, and ultimately they present a risk to our emergency services providers. National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System wastewater violations out at the Water Reclamation and Reuse Facility. As you heard the other day during stormwater, the current daily fine from the EPA is $37,500 per day. Those violations add up. We had one time we had a violation or a series of minor violations, it turned out, but it still cost the city $135,000 in fines. So it's something we don't want to do. The crew of the WRF does a great job. You talk about punching above their weight. That plant is about as efficient as it can be. We have one more issue we need to address out there besides the ongoing maintenance issues. And the plant's 20 years old now, so we are replacing aging infrastructure out there as well, and that is temperature. And we've been dealing with temperature since, well, it was part of the first and only permit that's now been expired 15 years, but we still operate under it, that our temperature has to be addressed. And they're estimating the cost of that between $8 million and $12 million. So we're constantly in negotiations trying to figure out what is the standard for temperature, what is the background temperature we should be shooting for, and making sure that we comply with those regulations. Deteriorating pavement conditions. You know, you look outside and see that snow, it melts, freeze, thaw, tears our roads up. It's way different than in Southern California. So we have deteriorating pavement conditions. We were putting away anywhere from $200 to $300, maybe $400,000 a year to address those issues. And we were playing chase our tail. We would take the most beat up streets in the worst condition, completely rebuild them at a huge cost, while we had streets that could have been, had some preventive maintenance done to them that could have extended their life perhaps double what their initial useful life was. So a couple of years ago, more like about 6 or 7, Tyler Palmer and the street department came forward with a plan to address that, a preventative maintenance plan. And we've been going through with that. That has helped a ton. We also have, under the mayor's direction, have allocated a lot more funding. We've had some help from the state when they increased their gas tax and shared it with us, but we have had funding between $650 and $1,000 and $1.2 million since that time. I believe the estimate was that we need to put $1.3 million away into the street system in order to give it the type of maintenance that we would like.
Annually.
Annually. 1.4? Yeah, $100,000 here, $100,000 there. Okay, so we've addressed that. That doesn't mean the battle is won. It just means that we are doing a better job at falling behind less. So we will continue to adjust that. Insufficient revenues jeopardize service levels, and insufficient capacity to maintain service demands are related. Don't really need explanations. If we had a lot more money, we could deliver a lot more services. But since we don't, we have to prioritize, and that's what the council does for us. Deteriorating wastewater collection system. This is our, I believe it has to do, if I'm, stormwater, is that correct, or is it sewer?
That's sewer.
Sewer, sorry about that. So that is underground piping. So we're systematically addressing those issues. If you look in your issue statement, you'll see that it's being addressed in a systematic fashion. And the reason that is up there is because the biggest danger that you've got is if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And the next thing that happens, you have a catastrophic failure. You then realize that, wow, it isn't just where it failed here, it's failing up and down the system. So if you don't systematically address these issues, you're setting yourself up for catastrophic failures. You saw in our neighbors just to the south of us, Lewiston, where they had to increase their water and sewer rates by a huge amount because of all the deferred maintenance that they had. They assessed their system and they needed X amount of dollars per year in order to keep it current, and they had to raise rates in order to do that. The city of Moscow's been, I think, at the forefront in assessing it and coming at it from an incremental fashion. So we're pretty proud of how we've done that. Lack of backup power for drinking water wells. This was one of those situations. If power went down, if we didn't have portable power to generators to address that. So that's something we're working on as well. The declining city water supply. We talked a little bit about surface water containment. That is one of the things that we wanted to address. You can't conserve your way out of a declining water supply. Council member Steve Bush said that about 20 years ago. You can conserve all you want, but if after your conservation efforts it still falls, you need to go do something else. And that something else, with council direction, was to seek other ways to address it, and surface water containment was the way. PBAC, the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee, has been critical in that effort as well, and bringing those two states and two counties, two cities together to do that has given credibility to those efforts. Climate change science highlights the need for significant action. That was one that we looked at last year. We'll talk about again today in a few moments. Service growth demands are outpacing resources. As if you look at the services provided by the city, and I will look at community events, look at parks and recreation, look at our efforts in transparency and communicating with the public. Programs that have exploded over the last 10 years as the public demands more involvement. The public demands that they are involved in decision making. They like the services that are being provided, but in providing those services, it also comes with a cost. So we look at ways, again, for collaborating, so on and so forth. Inadequate annual facility inspections and commercial pre-plans. This is a fire department issue, and the idea is if you can prevent, prevention is better than reaction to a fire event. So this was an effort to move forward, do more inspections, catch problems before they become issues. And we addressed that by going from a half-time fire inspector to a full-time fire inspector. Chief Nickerson and his crew continue to work through that, but that's one of the things that we've done so far. Inadequate residential and training at Facility Station 2, Fire Station number 2, out by the North Lake Tahoe Highway District shop and the fairgrounds. It is a usable station, but it also has challenges. So first step was to get an assessment of it, what it would cost to fix it. That plan was done a couple of years ago. We've not done anything with it. It's a lower priority, and we had other priorities ahead of it, but that has not fallen off the table. Aging infrastructure in the center of community, social, and cultural activity, also known as downtown and Friendship Square. That is being addressed. It would have been addressed in 2020, but for COVID. The idea was to find out what the community wants to do with downtown, and that means talking to stakeholders, having public meetings, so on and so forth. Things that weren't allowed under the restrictions of COVID-19. So we plan to move ahead with that this fall. There are funds that have been budgeted in order to set that planning effort. And the idea is to, in conjunction with the Urban Renewal Agency, the City of Moscow, other stakeholders, perhaps getting some CDBG grants, Community Development Block Grants, in order to renovate downtown. Since Farmers Market moved downtown onto Main Street, I think it was 5 or 6 years, maybe 7 years ago now, it has exploded between 5,000 and 10,000 people per weekend or per Saturday morning visiting downtown, and it's shown that the aging infrastructure that's been on the ground since 1982 needs to be replaced. And if Farmers Market is going to be there, we probably need to address how that infrastructure can enhance the market as well. So that is in process as well. And then lastly, the lack of affordable housing creates economic disadvantages. Again, was another direction that we got last year that we'll be talking about more today. If you look at the priorities, and if you look at two new ones, for instance, climate change science highlights needs for significant action is a number 2 priority, and lack of affordable housing creates economic disadvantages is a level 3 priority. That has to do with what we can do locally. If you look at climate change, then there are things that the old adage, you know, think globally, act locally. So what can we do? And we'll talk about that a little more. Some of the things that we've done the last 10 years where we've reduced the city's carbon footprint, city organizational carbon footprint by 20%, and we're in the process of developing a plan in conjunction with our Sustainable Environment Commission and Climate Action Working Group subcommittee of the Sustainable Environment Commission and our own Environmental Services Group to come up with a viable plan that stretches us and is attainable. So there are things we can do locally, going to hybrid vehicles, eventually all electric vehicles, so on and so forth. When and how that occurs is what will be developed and will be brought to you. And by the way, that plan, or we call it the 20 by 20, the reduction of 20% of our carbon footprint by 2020 will be presented to council at the beginning of Earth Month in April, and also should bring a recommendation on the approach to go ahead and address this climate change. Affordable housing is a little bit different. We've wrestled with that for a long time, and we'll talk more about it. Our Fair and Affordable Housing Commission has dealt with this issue for years. Cities taken approaches, different approaches, from adding an amount of money that could support affordable housing efforts. But as you know, the amount of money it would take would be huge. And then there's always the what form does it take? And I know Mr. Belknap is here to amplify if you have questions on how to do that. So a little bit different. This is one of those issues that the city certainly can be involved in, but a city of our size typically being involved in affordable housing is a little bit unique. We aren't a resort city, much as we like to be for the local option sales tax advantages, but if you take Sun Valley, Ketchum, those areas have dealt with lack of affordable housing for many, many years, and they have a very high service level that their population wants, but they're still service-based jobs, and when your housing is millions of dollars, it doesn't provide a lot of opportunities for those in the service industry to live in close proximity to your town. So again, you see it in areas like that. It's less prevalent in a city of our size situated as we are. Okay, so these additional MCAs that we're about to go into, and I'll pause after this slide so that we can talk a little bit, or if you have questions about what I've talked about so far. Strategic planning is a long-term and ongoing process, very different from goal setting. The mayor loves to talk about when he was first on council, there was goal setting. I'll even go back farther than that. When I first came here in 1992, my first goal setting session that I was involved with took place at the old Student Union building on campus. We were in one of their large conference rooms. We had mayor, council, the head of every commission, and selected, county commissioners, and selected community leaders from service organizations. I'll bet there were 45 people in the room, and every one of those 45 people had an idea of what those goals should be. So we came out of there with, if I recall, 113 goals that the city was supposed to accomplish, and not a metric, not a resource to help us do that. And as you might expect, it was a great idea to figure out, okay, what's on everybody's mind, but when it got down to how many can you realistically complete in a year or make headway, we had more goals than we had staff at the time. So it didn't work out. And we changed that over the years, but still it was not unusual to come out of goal setting with 35 or 40 goals. And then we'd get down to 20 or 30 goals. And then we broke them into programs and projects, but the bottom line is it became unwieldy, and it seemed like we were competing against each other trying to get stuff done instead of bringing a very focused approach.
Well, not only that, it took a year to go through that very process, and then you started the damn thing over again. It was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, the biggest
Be honest
issue
about it.
Yeah, the biggest issue at the time was if you had a goal that you were working on and then another goal supplanted it, the work that you had already put into it oftentimes went to waste. So this is a long-term ongoing process. It allows progress to be made by the city council through the allocation of city resources, and that includes human resources and funds, in a thoughtful and purposeful manner in order to achieve the council and community priorities. Last year, you asked us to develop direction on the following additions to what would be considered for inclusion as major challenge areas. First is climate change science, and second is lack of affordable housing. So now, before we go into those two, where we'd like your focus, because as we develop the budget, we need to know what level of resource you want us to bring to the table. So, any questions?
I've got one comment I want to make, Gary, and it's for all counselors, is as we go through the priorities, the ones, the twos, the threes, some of these things are ongoing, and will be around forever because we need to keep working on them. Aging stormwater drain system, that's going to be an ongoing thing. Eventually, the inadequate radio infrastructure will be fixed and it'll go away. So as we go through these things and the deteriorating pavement conditions, I mean, we're going to be working on paving until the cows come home. This is going to be an ongoing thing for us. So some things, don't get confused that, and I always like to say this, and I think everybody's got a good grasp for this, the ones are the most important and they'll get done, because sometimes you'll get a 2 or a 3 that'll get completed while we're still working on a 1. And that's the important thing on this, because some of these things are ongoing. Anyway, just want to throw that in there, Gary.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and it does relate to those, the priority, the 1, 2, and 3. What do those really mean? Or can you explain that a little more?
Well,
Is that like what has been determined that number 1 is what we want? It's clearly doesn't always work out, as the mayor said, to be what you accomplish first, but does that mean that that's what has been determined to be the most important or the most possible?
yeah, the council rated these back in the ones that, I guess everyone here except for the climate change and affordable housing, rated all of these when they initially developed the strategic plan. And the idea was, what is the biggest threat to the community? What is, if there was a catastrophic failure, what would happen? And I recall the discussion about water. And what would you do if all of a sudden your water just went away? What would happen to your community, economic development, all of those sorts of things? And it was one of those things that just became, it was a no-brainer. That was something we had to do. The inadequate radio infrastructure was something about what if one of our emergency services personnel were injured because of lack of communication? What would happen? And the council deemed that that was something we needed to focus on. Now, again, it takes a bunch of time, and I could bore you, or maybe not bore you, but let you know all the efforts that have gone through for that. But you don't raise $2.2 million overnight. So we've made headway. We've got plans. We've got some money put away, and you see that every year in the budget. But again, it takes a while to do that. You will see a big push for that, because it seems like now that the police station's out of the way, we can bring additional resources for something else. And that's kind of how this works as well, is as you start knocking them off, you can start bringing additional resources on the ones that are left.
So just because it's a number 1 doesn't necessarily mean that item will get the funding before something that is a number 2. There's just a lot of factors involved in those decisions.
There is, and sometimes it has to do with, we talked about an exceptional situation or a unique situation, for instance, on the 6th Street Bridge. All of a sudden, we're in line to secure funding of almost $1 million from the EDA. That is a situation that it needs to be replaced. It may not have been the highest priority on the CIP list, but it became higher priority when part of it washed out a couple of years ago. But that ability to leverage our local funding kind of pushed it above some other programs.
Something I'd like to add too, sometimes through innovation, we can really make amazing strides. Deteriorating pavement conditions, Tyler Palmer and his team have came up with all kinds of new methods over the last 5 or 6 years that have been implemented that really spread our buck a lot farther. And it's been something that's been an amazing thing to watch. And so even though that's number 1, and we know that we need, we heard the figure 1.4 million a year in order to just keep going year over year over year,
these folks are coming up with new ideas and new innovations where that's really helping the process along. And so through some of these things, through new initiatives and new things that come along our way as we're going along, and we're going to run into that, in my view, with the climate change, what we're dealing with on climate change, because as time goes on, things are going to get better. Solar panels are going to get better. They're going to be cheaper. They're going to be more durable, as well as other things, whether it's LED lighting or the electric cars, so on and so forth. So the neat thing about that is, as we're going along through these things, even if it is a 1, a 2, or a 3, processes are going along that will enhance those as we go, Brandy. And I think that's important for everybody to recognize. Okay.
And if I can as well, a lot of these have offshoots. If you look at the finance department, one of their issues that they were dealing with was lack of a comprehensive investment strategy. We addressed that within the past year and brought to the council proposals, and now we are getting a return on our city investments that exceeds that of the local government investment pool. Again, it cascades up. That provides us with additional revenues that we can then bring to bear on the capital improvement program or other programs as well. So it cascades down. If you look at the management restructuring that we did over the last 15, 18 months, same thing. That provided us the opportunity to bring, I'll just use Bill Belknap's group as an example, to bring community development, private development, and public development together so that you erase a lot of those lines and become more efficient. And it caused us to look at how we do public projects. And one of the things that when we brought that through the council, we explained that we hire a lot of consultants, and consultants cost a lot of money. And it isn't like the consultant is working for you. You're not looking over their shoulder. They come in, you look at what they've done, you spend a lot of time reviewing it, giving them additional guidance. It's not a very efficient way of doing business. So the restructuring allowed us to go ahead and bring on a couple of more engineering techs, and you'll see in this budget year a scheduled proposal to add a staff engineer. The idea is that we are doing more design of public projects in-house now. We're bringing dedicated resources to reviewing private development plans in order to be as efficient and allow development to occur as the council wants it, as our land use regulations and our building codes permit. So the idea is to provide more of a seamless service to the community, if you will. But those are all cascading things that come out of this.
I want to add something to that too, Gary. One of the things I always task Gary with is, my gosh, we come out with these wonderful plans about whatever the plan may be. We come up with a real nice notebook. We fill the thing out. Some consultant's done it. It costs us $40,000. We stick it on the shelf, and maybe somebody looks at it once in a while. And that just drove me absolutely insane. So I said, why can't we just fix stuff? Fix things, move forward with things, and that's part of this. So I just want to throw that out as an example, because that's something that, and look at, it's historic for cities, not just our city. I think all cities do that. And so let's just take a little bit different look at how we're doing that.
You bet. One of the things that the water and sewer comprehensive plans, there was money over the last 3 years, I believe it was about $200,000 in each fund to redo the comprehensive plans. We went back through them and determined they needed to be updated. And a lot of that updating could be done with staff and then bring the experts in for what we need to bring the experts in. But it wasn't like, okay, this plan's now obsolete, let's spend $200,000 and do a new one. So it's efficiencies like that that I think that a calculated approach to this allows us to look at it and try and be as efficient as possible. Okay, anything else before we get into the two new proposed MCAs? And I will talk about the slides a little bit.
Hey, Gary?
Tyler, oh, go ahead.
There's a question back here.
The prioritization we did last year, climate change and housing were included in that ranking.
Okay,
So they did land in their 2 and their 3 respectively because of the ranking.
yeah.
We just had the issue that we didn't have the extra stuff, so that kind of followed up to it.
Yeah, for those of you in TV land, Jen was just saying that they were prioritized last year, so she doesn't have a microphone back there. Okay, so as I said, Tyler's here. He is the Deputy City Supervisor, and under him is the Environmental Services Group. I know Kyle Steele is here as well. He is the liaison to the Sustainable Environment Commission. And so they're here to answer questions or elaborate on the slides that I'm going to show you. So it's a fairly long, well, very short major challenge, but climate change science highlights need for significant action. But it's got a lot of explanation underneath it. And this was all included in your packets. But the most personal one, I guess, is the one that's on the screen here. Climate change science continues to highlight the need for significant attention to making changes in the near term. This isn't one of those situations where what Moscow does is going to solve climate change across the globe. However, as we talked about, think globally, act locally. Policy action at the federal and state level has been non-existent to date. And so nobody is out in the forefront saying, okay, you need to do this. A great example is you've not seen federal or state legislation that puts the actual cost of plastic water bottles, saying that that is a major pollutant, that it uses a bunch of energy, has a large carbon footprint, but the bottom line is without some regulation, it is still a pretty cheap and efficient way to market a product. So until we see some collaboration on things like that, we're not going to see this. A federal or statewide issue regulations regulating recyclable materials. We still put glass in landfills. And some would say, how can it be cheaper to mine and produce new glass than it is to take used glass, melt it, and use it again? But again, until there is something regulating that, it's apparently not going to happen until
Going
the
down the road, there
economics
may be
meet.
an enhancement in a way that they'll be able to figure that out and do
Sure.
it. And so we don't ever want to have a blind eye to that, because very possibly, who knows, 5 years from now, it very well may happen.
And that's what we try to do. Our recycling system is very nimble. We brought a couple of initiatives to you in the last couple of years, starting with, does it make sense to move the recycling center, build a new recycling center? Where are we sending our recyclables since China shut off their China Sword initiative, shut off the main, I guess, destination point for recyclables in the United States? Tim Davis is doing a great job identifying different places to take it, but it's heightened our discussion to what is the carbon footprint of recycling? Does it exceed, does it cost us more in carbon than it would be non-recycling? And that may seem nonsensical or working at opposite ends, but you've got to ask the hard questions and then decide, okay, is carbon footprint more important than what? So those are things that our sanitation and our environmental services group and Sustainable Environment Commission will provide some recommendations to council. In 2010, the city of Moscow adopted the Greenhouse Gas Inventory and Energy Efficiency Report. That was through ICLEI, committed to achieving a 20% reduction of 2005 greenhouse gas levels by the year 2020. Those of you who are around or had an eye to that effort back in 2005, 2006, one of the things that we had is we couldn't even measure the electricity that was being used by our traffic control signals because they were wired together. Some were wired with street lights, so on and so forth. So trying to figure out, would LED traffic signals save us a bunch of electricity? We couldn't. It took us a long time to figure that out, and some other issues as well. So one thing the ICLEI program did was allow us to standardize with some things other communities were doing. So that got us to the point where we at least had a yardstick to measure by. I will tell you that it was a stretch to meet that. Last year, probably 18 months before probably mid-1919. Tyler and I and Kyle Steele would talk about, okay, what do we need to achieve that 20? Because the 20 was very symbolic, that if we can show we can do that, it's going to create buzz, it's going to create some inertia by which we would move forward, at least with the idea that we can do this. And 19% was not going to do it. 20% or above is what we were shooting for, and we achieved that. And I'm not going to steal all of the ESG's thunder. They'll tell you about that in April. But it shows that, and admittedly, there were some things that we were doing that were extremely low-hanging fruit. As you move up the tree, it gets a little harder, and that's why Sustainable Environment and ESG are working so hard to try and give us something we can achieve while stretching us as well. If you look at, this is just a repeat, the first bullet is a repeat of what I just talked about. Resolution 2018-23 states, the consequences of a changing climate, including drought, higher temperatures, altered precipitation patterns, increased forest fires, more plant and animal pests and disease, and increased air pollution, have the potential to increasingly impact all Moscow residents. If you recall, that was one of those things, again, that there was a presentation to council. Council passed the resolution because they agreed that in order to address climate change, again, not that we are going to change it globally, but we needed to try and lead, and that was the idea of that resolution. I'm not going to read this whole quote, but this was one that was in your packet as well, and it provides some history of how long climate change has been around. Over 25 years, there were discussions about climate change is critical. It's happening, that if it goes unchecked, it will be a big issue. And I think most everyone in the scientific community, maybe even political community today, will tell you that there are global weather changes going on. There are a lot of opinions on why they are and what is the cause, but I don't think there is a lot of argument that our weather patterns are changing somewhat. So that is what that extremely long quote is about. And here we go. So finally, progress in this initiative will require commitments at the local level, and strategic planning is the ideal process to address this issue. In order to be a successful, local government will be required to lead the conversation in regards to community policy and funding for solutions. So we talked that we have things in place at this point. We have 6 new police cars that will come online this year, 3 from last year that were carried over, and 3 new ones this year. They are all hybrids. Our passenger fleet is, meaning light truck and sedans or crossovers, are coming out as hybrids. As electric vehicles become more affordable, because the bottom line is we still have to deliver services. So again, we'll have to stretch for it, but we will go to electric vehicles. That's the plan when we can do so and make it work. And there's technology as well. Those of you, the mayor, Art, and Sandra sat in on a presentation from some community members, and I know that there were others on the council that were solicited to listen to that conversation as well. And it was an invitation to the council to adopt a resolution that was, it was great. I mean, the things that it wanted or it directed were great if you could get it done. But if you bankrupt yourself doing it, or if you depend on technology that doesn't exist yet, you need to be nimble enough to deal with that. For instance, there's no technology, at least that I know of, that's ready to go for a backhoe with an electric engine, or dump trucks, semis, road graders. That's technology. It's being developed, but it's not ready today. So as we move forward, and I guess what I would like the council to consider as they discuss this, which you're going to in a few moments, to look at what we can do. As I said, stretch ourselves, but make sure that whatever we do is attainable.
Well, one of the things too, some of that infrastructure will be needed, such as the charging stations. You know, I mean, eventually we'll have more and more electric cars and we're gonna need them, but we're also gonna need the infrastructure that makes that happen, and that's critical. The new innovations, and I made a comment during that, both Art and Sandra heard this from me, is that, you know, there's a very good possibility if we set a goal of 20% over this next decade, there's a very good possibility could actually achieve 30% depending on the new technology and the new things that come along. I do know of one person that put in 2 charging stations just recently here. So as those infrastructure pieces come together, and I think we'll see more of that through government too, grants and different things that we don't know about yet, and so we got to keep our eyes open for that and to be able to implement those. And so Tyler and his team, as well as our sustainable environment group, needs to be on the lookout for this stuff as well all the time. So, and I think a lot of that through the grant process will help have Lisa Anderson will be doing this for us too, which will be a big thing. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there in the conversation.
Well, I've now presented climate change, so I turn it over to the council for your discussion and provide staff with direction. Like I said, Kyle is here virtually and Tyler is here as well. So if you have questions, I don't know how much of a sneak peek they want to give you on April, but as we will be deep into the budget by April, so we need some direction ahead of time. So with that, we'll stand for any questions, and then when that issue, we get direction on that issue, then we'll move to affordable housing.
One-star Brandy.
Question. So, how do you see a working relationship with the Climate Action Working Group that has reached out saying we want to help the city?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tyler Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Happy to be here this afternoon. Yeah, that's a great question, Brandy. It's one of the things that I've always enjoyed about working in Moscow is that there is a wealth of knowledge, subject matter experts in the community, and it's something that we really want to make sure that we do engage. It is, as Gary mentioned, it's a rapidly evolving field. For example, as we went and looked at our alternate fuel transition plan, we generated our first, we generated our first alternate fuel transition plan 4 years ago. A formal alternate fuel transition plan. We identified vehicles that we were going to target for alternate fuel uses, went through the fleet and looked at what technology was available. We've now had to rework that plan 4 times because every year there are just more and more options that are becoming available, which is super exciting. It's a lot of work, but having subject matter experts that help us as we work through that process is something we're really engaged in. And so Kyle and his staff, Kyle is the staff liaison to the Sustainable Environment Commission and the work group, the subcommittee of the Sustainable Environment Commission that is working on this issue in particular. And so Kyle and his group are working hand in glove with them as we develop these options. You'll notice in your packet there is a spreadsheet, and I know it's a little bit wonky, but what it does is it goes through and identifies the items in the capital program and the potential climate change impacts that they could have or updates that could be made. And so one of the things that we've really emphasized as we've gone through this, and I think Gary hit on this well, is that as we work in local government, one of the things that I really love about our job is that there's an inherent practicality. And one of the things we're always discussing in our staff meetings is there's the technical truth and the practical truth. And the practical truth beats the technical truth every time. Something might be technically true, but if it's not practically true, it doesn't matter if it's technically true because we can't practically execute it. And so within that, what our goal is to really work with those groups you allude to, Brandy, work with our staff, work with the departments throughout the city. One of the things that's been initiated is meetings directly with each department to review these operations, review opportunities, so that we can put together a packet of options for the city council for you to look at. There's a graph that's included with that spreadsheet. And if you look at that graph on the top, there's a line there that shows just to maintain our reduction goal. The city's not gonna quit growing. You know, we continue to grow, we've grown consistently, and so what that top line shows is just a projection of 1.5% growth. At 1.5% growth, the difference between that line and then the maintain reduction goal line, that area is, that's additional stuff we'll have to do just to maintain our current levels. Now, the hope is with new technologies, with additional projects, there are things that we can do there, but we're swimming against the current as the city grows, because we have to add additional equipment, we have to add additional personnel, and so there's gonna be a certain amount of investment that we have to make just to maintain this lower goal. And then what we'd like to do is generate some package of options so that you all can make very informed decisions moving forward about some of the policy decisions that we'll have to have. And just like an example of a policy decision would be, what calculus do you want us to use when determining if we purchase an EV? As Gary indicated, at this point, for certain vehicles in the fleet, the price point makes sense. We run the calculation, and if the fuel use that vehicle has got, we've got a lot of good data, and that's very helpful. So we're proposing to replace unit 111 with an EV. Okay, how much fuel is 111 used? What are oil changes costing us? What are the difference in the maintenance costs? What's the longevity cost between the two? And we can do a good cost-benefit analysis, and we can say, yeah, you know what? An EV pencils out at 6.5 years, and we plan on keeping it for 10. And so then it pencils out financially. The policy decision would be, you know, does the council want us to make sure that it pencils out financially before we move forward? Or is it just if there's a viable technology that's that may be 20% more expensive, do we move forward with it? If it's 5% more expensive, do we move forward with it? And then we want to be able to show you all the budgetary impact of those decisions and how that fits within the city's long-term and capital programs.
Well, with that being said too, Tyler, one of the things that we all have to be cognizant about is the fact that when we come through with the recommendations and we have a resolution about where we're going and how we're going to get there, what we want to make sure is that we don't have something that's real easy, but also something that's very difficult. We need to be stretched a little bit with our imaginations, but not so far off that it's an unachievable thing, because when you do that, then it becomes, it's counterproductive, absolutely counterproductive. So we need to be realistic. One of the things that we talked about, and you were on that phone call as well, and you talked a little bit about the biofuel that we use. And one of the professors on there talked about, you know, using vegetable oil or used grease and that sort of thing for vehicles. And you brought up an excellent point. Look, you can't use those in these vehicles because it ruins the warranties on them. If an engine goes out or something, then that's, you know, so there's a manufacturing point of this as well, where manufacturers are going to have to be on board, and they will. It's just taking everybody, I mean, it's a series of different things, whether it's manufacturers, cities, so on, industry, so on and so forth, in order to achieve what we need to do. However, we need to push forward with that. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there.
I think it's a good point, Mayor. You know, the 20% goal, Gary indicated, we had to stretch for. We sat down, we had meetings, and Gary sat us down and said, guys, how are we getting there? This is coming up. And we implemented a couple projects. You know, we pushed some projects forward, a couple of them that we hadn't previously budgeted. We really leaned on our partner, Avista, to get them to change out more. Like, it wasn't something that just happened. That was something that we really had to push for. And so there is an advantage to having that stretch component to the goal. And as you'd indicated, Mr. Mayor, with the technology advancing, the hope would be that this accelerates, that each year as we revisit this, we might be saying, wow, you know, there's more available here, and the cost has come down, and we can adjust this accordingly.
And Tyler, full disclosure for everybody listening out there is that we said, oh man, we got to get with it and get it going. And I said, well, it's easy, just make sure it happens. As the mayor, I said that. So, and you guys all made it happen, and just shazam, and we hit it. And so, with that being, you know, so sometimes we do that. And my statement was the easiest portion of it, just being able to say that and move along. But anyway, everybody did very well with that.
All right, I'd like to make a quick comment too, that it's important for us as we move into this realm not to overinvest in current technology or even what we think is coming up, because the chances of getting involved with something, oh, we chose beta but VHS one, or let's invest in 3.25-inch floppy drives, and now everybody's got a USB. So as the technology changes, and especially as you pointed out on the call, the potential for hydrogen vehicles comes along. So investing 100% in what we think is current or upcoming technology is probably counterproductive. So that's why this major challenge area, I think, will be falling into the critical but ongoing part of things, just because it's going to take a long time to change over from what we have to what we should, but without overdoing it to the point that we've eliminated our ability to be more efficient and react in the future.
If I can, please, I have to say that I'm loving that I found this thing in this binder to start with, and that whole mess there was my fault, because I couldn't find that. But for those of us who get climate change to a degree, this is really useful, and this makes it real. And if we can keep this in the forefront of our mind as we're going into almost everything we do, you know, with our capital improvement plans and all of this, it's the pieces that we can do with a mind towards climate change that will make the difference in the end. I think that, going back to Brandy's question about how we keep our subject matter experts and our public subject matter experts involved, maybe this is that kind of a thing where they, you know, we look at what we're doing and we keep the environmental services group and your group, Tyler, and this, I can't remember the name of it now, Brandy, it was lots of words. Climate.
Just COG.
COG, there you go. But I think being able to continually work together, vetting the subject matter experts, and then keeping the policymakers in the loop and educating us as much as possible, because I hear climate change, I'm concerned about it, but I don't know how to make pieces work. So this is really important.
Yeah, I think that's been a positive thing that, you know, Mayor Lambert has pushed down through the organization, is an expectation that we're considering this as part of our operations, that it's part of the matrix of decision-making is, okay, how do we do this the most efficient way possible? And that includes from a climate change standpoint.
Okay, so for me, I will just say, when I opened this book and I was reading it, overall, I found it really depressing. You know, I mean, I actually called Brandy up and I said, oh God, I'm beyond depressed. And in part, that was because I felt like there's so many needs in the city and there's not enough money. And we could do this much and we could do this if we had money. So I always take the approach that if you say yes to something, you're saying no to someone else or something else. And so I just want to always keep that in mind. And the answer is, I appreciated your statements. It said, okay, we have to do an analysis. Okay, it's coming down. We can afford to do this. But I also want to know that each step that we take on every single project just means that we have less on everything. And so somehow, I guess the whole root cause of a problem for me is, how do we get more money?
How do you
I mean,
afford
that's just plain and simply,
Well,
just to be totally simplistic. The answer is, I think this book is full of great ideas. And I'm not saying climate change is a huge issue for me. And I think we need to really address that. And I appreciate all the work that you do and the Sustainable Environmental Commission do. I was on that for the last year and I loved it. But I just want to say, overall, this book is depressing to me.
Well, you know, well, I know I'd help you with your depression on that. I could fix you right up. But, one of the things I'll say, though, as we're going along, Maureen, I'll give you an example of something we're doing right now. We're building a new police department. It's not going to have solar panels right now. However, it's going to be wired for it, because we know good and well in a few years down the road that these solar panels are going to be better and they're going to be cheaper. And so there will be a time that we can afford them. So when we do implement things in the plan, we got to be thinking in those types of processes. And so that's what we're doing. And it may not pay off right now, but maybe in 4 years it pays off and becomes a big thing for us. So, and look at, you know, we've got to, when it comes to funding, we've got to be not only frugal and mindful of the amount of monies we're getting, because geez, all of us have seen, you know, property taxes have gone up and the different issues from the state and so on and so forth. And so we have certain things that we have to work within. But I'll tell you this, whenever you get depressed, always keep in mind, by golly, we're never going to give up. We're never going to give up. There's got to be a way, and we will chew through it and figure it out. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy either, but that's what we're going to do, folks.
I remember when I did my first orientation with you, Tyler, and I remember being so impressed that there was that whole sheet in terms of here's how we replace all our vehicles, and this is our goal on that. And I do think it all reinforces the need for strategic planning and really doing that. And I want to commend you for all the work that you and your unit does with respect to planning and looking at climate issues and determining how we can move forward with those issues.
Oh,
Thank
thanks,
you.
I appreciate it. Well, yeah, Kelly Cooper with our Environmental Services Department has just done immense amounts of work. And,
Outstanding.
you know, Carl with our fleet, you know, the alternate fuel transition plan, he really does a good job and takes very seriously doing this research, doing a lot of work penciling out how to make it work. He's currently working on a project to analyze how we get charging at all city facilities. We know that that's coming down the road. A lot of our internal combustion engines are going to be EVs. We already have multiple plug-in EVs in the fleet. As Gary mentioned, we've got hybrid police vehicles coming on board. And so it's going to be a need that's coming up, and that's something that they're actively doing and working hard to make sure they stay abreast of.
Okay.
Can I tag, this has just what he was talking about, if you don't mind me jumping
Sure,
in
go
there.
ahead.
Thanks.
Right in there, over to Art.
So Tyler, one of the things that I have been concerned about, and I think, gosh, probably everyone here has been concerned about, and it may be 15 steps too far ahead to talk a whole lot about, but is that planning for charging stations, not just for the city vehicles, but what about when hopefully the city individuals transfer over also to electric? Do we have ideas yet where those stations are going to go? And do we have any idea how the state wants to tax electrical at this point?
There are several proposals that have been going around. So on the tax front first, it's been broadly recognized across the country that the gas tax is got a death date coming up. It's just, we can't keep using gas taxes more and more vehicles transition away from gas as the means of propelling themselves. And so there are several pilot projects that have been taken off in states. It looks like most of the most popular proponents end up being a vehicle mile travel tax called a VMP tax. And so that's just, you know, your vehicle's already recording how many miles it travels. It already does that. And so it just reports, and you get a bill much like a water bill. You use X amounts of gallons, you pay X amount of water. With this, it'd be you drove X number of miles, you pay X amount. Now, there's some really nice things about that. It makes it, they can really scale it proportionate to the weight of your vehicle, which has been difficult to do when it's, you know, filling up the gas. It doesn't weigh you at the gas station and change your tax rate based on the damage your vehicle is doing to the road. And it captures your actual use. And so if it is somebody who just doesn't use the vehicle all that much, it still captures the use the way the gas tax did. So those are coming through, and I suspect that that's going to happen. There's going to have to be some fundamental changes to how we fund transportation infrastructure, period. On the question about charging infrastructure, more public charging infrastructure, that is something that we have taken a look at. Bill's group and my group, we took a pretty extensive look over the last couple of years. We analyzed a number of sites for a potential public charging space. And we'll continue to look at that. There are some grant monies that are potentially available for those types of projects. We have had recently installed, as the mayor indicated, here in town, the Monarch Hotel had a couple that just installed recently. And so that infrastructure will continue, and I think we'll be part of that conversation. We have identified, what do I identify, Bill? 6 potential spots on public land that we thought would be decent public charging locations. And so that is something that's part of the conversation already.
Thank you.
Yeah, this might be a Sisyphean contemplation, as it were, but the WRF, the Water Reclamation Reuse Facility, is a big muncher of all things energy. And we are currently looking at installing chillers, which suck electricity and energy like crazy and do not do anything good by way of carbon footprint. And the idea there is to cool the effluent to a certain level as it goes down Paradise Creek. And the question is, how long does the temperature maintain as it heads over into Washington? I'll bet it doesn't make it out past Airport Road hardly, and it's back up to the ambient temperature that it is now. And is there a way that we can work within regulations to avoid both the initial cost and operating cost and carbon impact of having to engage in what is, to my mind, an impossible task? Is there a way to work within the system to obtain carbon savings in the future by not having to do something?
we certainly hope to avoid having to put a chiller at the wharf. That would definitely be our goal. We hope that what seems to us like conflicting regulatory standards don't run into each other. One, we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Two, we've got a temperature standard that could end up with us installing infrastructure, as you indicated, Art, that would be a pretty enormous user of electricity and therefore generator of greenhouse gas emissions. We actually have a review meeting on Friday for our facility plan. So we have a comprehensive facility plan going on for that facility. And part of that plan is to identify what the best options are, the options that have been identified to try to deal with the temperature issue, and that will involve ongoing interaction with our regulatory agencies. I can tell you that the question of temperature and the temperature standard for Paradise Creek has been a long and arduous battle between IDWR, DOE, the city, and that has gone back and forth, and ultimately we'll end up with the standard that we do, and then it'll just be a matter of identifying if we can feasibly do something. You know, one of the things that it really boils down at this point with current technology to two options. We either put a chiller on it, and because we have to assure that we meet the standard. Otherwise, it's the fines that we've talked about every day, every time we're out of compliance. So the only way we assure that we meet the standard at this point with our current technology is to put a chiller on it or to pull out of the creek during those periods. And the big concern then is the environmental impact that we may have by pulling the city's flows out of the creek, which at that point in the summer, the hottest point of the summer, we pretty much are the flows in Paradise Creek. And so neither one is an ideal option. And so, yeah, it is, you're right, it's a little Sisyphean, Art. I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, as extension, it's always a balancing act because we're also looking at installing UV sterilization, and UV lights are another big muncher of electricity. And alternatively, we're using chlorine, which is not a happy process at all and has its own environmental impacts. And trying to achieve this balance, sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you wind up with no effect.
The only real positive development in that realm is that in the last 2 years, LED UV lights have come onto the scene and actually been shown to be effective. And so that's helped immensely with the electric consumption of those systems. But you're right, there's still a trade-off within there.
Brandon?
Yeah, so as far as we're sort of talking, I think now about direction and ideas of where you go, right, from here? So back to the Climate Action Working Group, what I'm hearing is, I know that Kyle, hello Kyle, I see you out there, with the SEC. So is the intention then, because from what I've received from them, they're saying, no fee for service. We are here to help support you and to continue giving you information. You bounce stuff off us. We'll go and find what you need. So is that the intention then, that you will continue to engage with them throughout this process and into the future and just take whatever they will give you, and then, you determine what you keep and what doesn't work for the city? But
I think it's been largely, and I'll let Kyle fill in too, I think it's largely been, it's been a cooperative relationship where city staff, we're exposed to different ideas through conferences, industry, trainings, et cetera, where we come across different technologies that we say, hey, we think this applies. We can make this work. This type of technology works for what we're doing. And then we're vetting those through the Sustainable Environment Commission. We're saying, hey, look at this. What do you think of this? Do you have ideas on this? And then they also bring their ideas in and say, hey, would this work? What about this? We read about this, and then we try and see how that incorporates. And Kyle's group does a really good job of making sure there's that two-way flow of information, so that in the end, what we vet through and bring to you is something that both groups have taken a hard look at and say, we think this is practical. Like we said, the practical, technical truth, we think this falls in that practical category. We think we can make this work with the resources that we have, and with the technology that's available to us. Kyle, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Just one thing that the Climate Action Work Group is doing is trying to look at climate change impacts and those assessments kind of at the community scale, whereas we've been charged in the past to look at really city operations and how to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions from city operations. And so I think where they can be a lot of benefit as helping us to flesh out new ideas and research and, looking at climate trends and those sorts of things, flooding, where that might occur, really to inform how we move forward with city operations. And then, eventually, potentially, there are a number of communities nationwide that actually have a citywide climate change plans, which, look at climate migration and, maybe at the county level. And so that's where I see our collaborative work going forward.
Thank you, Kyle.
And then, what about, are we doing everything we can to sort of try to reach out these collaborative, we talk about our different partners in the community, so President Green, or now with the new Schweitzer, thinking about that too, like really reaching out when these exciting things are happening to other partners in our community who also have an interest in tackling this issue together. Or the Department of Commerce and Labor. I mean, are we kind of really trying to think big and everything that you've done so far, we've reached that 20%. The vehicle thing, has its limitations. At some point we have to do something even bigger than that, and it really is going to involve other entities partnering with us. And what type of outreach, or can we, try to target that even more? Do we have resources to try to target that more?
Yeah, we do. Right before COVID hit, we were rolling out the implementation of the Environmental Stewardship Award. You all remember that?
Yeah.
That we worked on, which was a process that kind of evolved out of the implementation of the fats, oil, and grease program. And so what we planned on doing is working with the commercial community here in Moscow to start talking about, how to address water savings in your business, how to address lighting, giving the business community and our customers as much information as they want to help potentially implement some of these issues to, not only address our declining aquifer, but also energy usage and solid waste, which all kind of tie back to the issue of climate change, and directly or indirectly. So we do, that's kind of where we're at. Tyler, I don't know if you had anything on that.
And I guess I'm specifically thinking about like new building too, like incentives.
There are nationwide programs that already do that. The LEAD program, the University of Idaho actually has a commitment. Was it LEED Gold? Isn't that their standard for their buildings? What? Silver, maybe it was silver. Those programs exist, and so I would think that it would be far more likely that rather than generating a city-specific program, that maybe some sort of participation or encouragement for those existing programs.
Or I think about things like, waiving hookup fees for developments, or it could be tied in with affordable housing too, that include some particular aspects. I don't know if that's possible. I mean, it's possible. I don't know if it's advisable, but where they actually get a price break, because we know that long-term, this is going to be good for the whole community. If the more new building that happens, it's energy efficient.
Well, I think those discussions, we had a green building program. Bill, I don't know, is it still viable? Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
It'd be good to get Bill up here anyway. Stretch his legs a little bit. This is Bill Belknap, ladies and gentlemen, so welcome, Bill.
Thank you. As Gary mentioned, we had a green building program that was developed back in the early 2000s for a number of years. And the incentives that were provided as part of that program, and really we kind of developed our own standards, it was largely focused on residential development, so it did not address commercial development, because commercial was already well addressed by the LEED standards. But we did have a residential green building program. It was intended to try to encourage more sustainable development practices, greater energy efficiency, water conservation, low VOC building materials in the structure. And that was developed back in, I think, about 2003 and 4. And it was, we had some utilization of the program early on, and the incentives were not financial, but they were that we would give an expedited plan review. So at that point in time, really in that early to 2005 to 2007 was a fairly heavy active construction season for single-family dwellings. Historically, we permit 40 or 50 homes per year. We were approaching 80 homes during that time period, so there was a potential little bit of a delay in getting your plan review completed. But if somebody wanted to go through the program, they would get an expedited plan review, so they would be elevated up to the front of the line for their building plan to be completed. And upon completion, there would be a medallion and a certificate that would be provided to them that they could affix to the home, and a certificate they could provide to the future home buyer. We've gone through about 4 code cycles since that time, and a lot of the construction practice standards and energy efficiencies and water conservations have escalated on each of those code cycles to where really the base code requirements today met essentially every home that would be reviewed per the code standards would have met our green building standards at that point in time. The program still exists, but we haven't had a home constructed in it probably for a decade. Probably, I think the last one was probably about 2010. And so it really has not, we viewed it as codes evolved, became more energy conserving and more environmentally sustainable, to where the program really wasn't offering much of an incentive. And then in 2009-10, the recession hit, and we went from 80 homes a year to 20 homes per year. So getting to the front of the line for a plan review really wasn't a problem. And so our plan review times became much shorter. So that program, really the codes kind of evolved and adopted. Our demands kind of softened off, and so we really haven't seen much demand from home purchasers or from contractors for a program of that type.
So,
Commercial, largely we would rely upon lead. And really it's that home owner or the building owner that gets to reap the benefits of that in the long term, and the energy savings and the indoor air quality improvements and things that may come along from those practices, and so they definitely do benefit from that. And so we've not offered financial incentives from the city's perspective for that, those additional efforts.
Right, but so I guess what I'm hearing is it would take financial incentives at this point to generate the interest needed. It is possibly what you're saying, why there's been less interest, because the incentives that are in place aren't incentive enough.
I guess it comes to what is the goal? I mean,
Right.
if we've achieved much of the efficiency and energy conservation with the existing building codes, kind of what is our target? What are we trying to achieve? How would we try to financially incentivize that? And is that what the council wishes to do, and in what means would we do that?
Well, and I still think there's some tie-in with the affordable housing. You mentioned it benefits the homeowner because they have reduced bills. Well, that's a issue
Correct.
for people living in affordable housing. If their bills are reduced, that of course helps accomplish that dual challenge area of lack of affordable housing as well. So perhaps it could, I don't know, thinking about if that could be a viable time to incentivize some waivers for people who are going to build affordable housing, and they're going to put into place cost-saving utilities at the time that they do it.
And really that has, the 2 projects that participated most heavily in that green building program was the Green Acres project in that late 2000s, which was kind of our largest affordable housing project developed in town. And then as Nils has worked with the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust, that has been a primary focus of their work, is to ensure both to try to minimize the carbon footprint by using electric appliances rather than natural gas, but also doing, double offset stud walls, increased efficiency, higher E-rating windows. Really has been their focus to try to ensure that they are managing the full housing cost, including, not only just the mortgage, but obviously utilities carrying forward.
And I think he's a little unique because he sees the climate, this as a pressing issue, and he has a role to do something about it. So there may be some other developers who aren't as well-versed as he is, that perhaps there's a role for some incentive. I guess that would be my question is, could that be something, and you don't need to answer it now, but just to consider looking at now things have changed, things are more energy efficient with building. Is it time to relook at that and create a new updated program for that, I suppose? And maybe the answer is no, but.
So I have a question, and that is about the whole concept of how much have we worked with developers and contractors in order to encourage them or to even educate them on the issues of sustainability and climate issues? And so I just remember several years, I mean, it was years and years ago, but I think PCI started going out and doing inventories of people's houses and saying, this is what you could do to make your house more efficient. And I thought, okay, great. And I had them come in, made some changes to my house, and I thought it was helpful. And so I just sat there and thought, is there ways to collaborate in that, sharing some of the knowledge that we've all collected from the city and as well as the Sustainable Environmental Commission, to share that? That's number one. And number two is the idea of certain things are pretty expensive right now, and I wonder whether or not, like solar, if you had a larger scale of multiple developers all deciding that they were going to work on it, then the answer is you buy more of it, and maybe it'd be a less expensive proposition for everyone if we had more of a demand. Maybe?
Well, certainly there are economies of scale that might be achieved. Primarily in our particular location, it becomes, without kind of that a tax incentive, like we did for the police station, we couldn't pay for the system over a 40-year time period. And so that is kind of just a current condition of our location, you know, and how much solar energy received, as well as the efficiencies of solar panels that exist today. I think we really need to look towards that technology improving, increasing efficiency for it to be more economically viable in our location.
Mr. Mayor, can I jump in for a
Yeah.
sec? Specifically for housing, we've been having the regional housing leadership team meeting since, gosh, I don't know, it's maybe been a year now. And what I hear over and over and over again is less concern about our code requirements now, and more concern about costs and how their individual costs are going up so high. Concerns about hookup fees and that sort of thing. And then specifically in affordable housing is just support of the organizations that focus on it. So many of the developers are not necessarily looking at affordable as they are just housing. And so specifically with NILS and that Affordable Housing Trust, it is purely, the concern there is purely making ends meet so that they can continue building. So it's interesting. I hear you about the green building program that we had, and in our effort to make our codes where they're at now, to bring them to that level, everybody seems to have come along. And so the incentives, I see the call maybe for an examination of something other than an incentive program and maybe more of a hookup fee situation, hookup fee re-examination. That seems to be what the call is, way less than,
That is an incentive.
Let's,
yeah.
Bill,
And I don't mean waiving it. What I mean is
Bill, before you get into all this,
Yeah.
because we're crossing over right into fair and affordable housing, which I
Yeah.
think we need to talk about next. And so, what I think is, and Gary, you can straighten me out on this a little bit. So how I understand it, with our climate action, our climate group is gonna be bringing a presentation in front of the council in April, is that correct?
Yes.
About what their recommendations are. And I think that's terrific, so we'll see that in the next 2 months. With that being said, maybe we should just go ahead and go on to fair and affordable housing now, but let's take a 10-minute break before we do that and let everybody get their thoughts together. It's 3:46, so let's come back at 3:56.
Okay.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. It is 4 p.m., so Gary, I will turn it over to you. I know you had a few statements you wanted to make.
You bet, thank you. A comment that you made just before the break, Your Honor, when you said that it seems like the conversation is starting to flow over into affordable housing because a lot of the issues are the same. And I know it's obvious, but there are two ways you can go. You can either regulate change, which is done like our NPDES permit. We're regulated, you need to meet this or else there's going to be a penalty that you're going to have to pay. The other is incentives. And whether you're talking about incentives with to builders to build to a certain level, I think Bill adequately explained everything about how the green building program works and how just the recognition isn't sufficient. However, we're starting to achieve some things through the different codes that have been adopted since. However, the discussion, whether you're talking about providing incentives through hookup fees or facilities charges, or whether you're talking about reductions in the cost of building permits, you're going to hit it either on the revenue side or you're going to hit it on the expense side. So, and again, these are situations that the council can direct us to do. So it might be something, as Tyler was talking about with the doing the cost-benefit analysis of electric vehicles or any sort of climate change, something that is more environmentally friendly. You look at that, whether you can afford it, number one, and then what kind of resources you want to bring to it. So in this case, I know as we talk about affordable housing, there's been discussion about, well, do we resurrect the affordable housing line item in the budget? And does that make sense? It might make sense. The question is, again, what do you use it for? Is it something that goes automatically to the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust, as it did in the past? Is it something you provide an incentive program? Who knows? So those are the types of things that as we go through, we need direction on what would you like us to do over the next year. Typically how this happens is you kick it back to staff and say, okay, this is a full-fledged MCA, we've given you direction, now bring us issues or bring us strategies to go ahead and address it. So as we go through this, hopefully we'll be able to give that sort of direction.
As you remember, the fair and affordable housing amount of money that we had in there for a number of years just rolled over every year because it was never used too for a certain amount of time.
So maybe we go back to this later, which is fine, but like when you just talked about, Tyler talking about the EV vehicles and what do we want? Do we want them to do the cost benefit? Do you want to talk about that later? But I think we still haven't answered that question for him. Do we want to
Question on what, Brandy?
What direction do we want staff to, what approach do we want them to take when they decide, does it make sense for us to buy a hybrid of this vehicle or a electric vehicle? Do we want it to pencil out in this amount of time? I mean, I have my thoughts on that, but we haven't really talked about that yet.
Well, come on up. Tyler made the point. We're transitioning over to that. In fact, we got 6 in the police department, the hybrids, and eventually they will go to be regular electric cars, but we gotta wait till we have the infrastructure and that type of thing as we get with that. And that's how I understood it.
Yeah, exactly, Mayor. What we're proposing, Brandy, is that we work with the Sustainable Environment Commission, with their Climate Change Action Group, with our Environmental Services Department, and we're currently doing that work. That's what that spreadsheet in the packet is indicative of, is we're reviewing the city programs, we're reviewing the upcoming projects and the capital projects. And so what we want to bring back to you all in April, we're timing it out, gives us a little time to put this together. A lot of the focus was on hitting that 20% goal, and so now we're pivoting toward what comes next. And so what we want to bring to the council is a suite of options for what that looks like.
Okay.
And so then you guys can make that policy decision and say, so we can say, hey, okay, here's what maintaining the 20% looks like. Here's what an additional 5% looks like. Here's what an additional 10% looks like. These are the projects involved. These are the budgetary impacts. These are how we may fund that sort of thing. And so that's what we want to bring back, are really feasible, clean packages so that you guys can make the policy decisions about, okay, we want to get aggressive and we like the 15% budget. let's set that as a goal and go for it type of a thing. And so that's what we would propose bringing back to the council.
That sounds great.
That makes
Yep.
sense, total
I agree.
sense. Okay, thanks, Brandy. Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, and we do that every year in the budget as well. When the hybrid police cars came through, they are more expensive than just an internal combustion engine. So at that time, we looked at the cost savings, the advantages, and made the decision to bring that proposal to council, which you then approved in the annual budget. So that's going on all the time. But, yeah, I think it makes sense if we could get a guidance document so that we're able to formalize that, that would help us a ton. Okay? Okay, so this is the second new MCA. Affordable housing, lack of affordable housing creates economic disadvantages. So as we start looking at the base definition, and Gina lived with this when she was commissioning the housing study. The definition of affordable housing, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, families is housing on which the occupant is paying no more than 30% of gross income for housing costs, including utilities. So those that are spending more than that, they're outside the definition of affordable housing. So they're spending more of their disposable income on housing than they should be. So it's causing issues elsewhere in their budgets. So this is just an explanation of the Palouse Regional Housing Assessment that council agreed to participate. PEP was working on that. It was across Whitman County, Latah County, Pullman, Moscow, WSU, Idaho, and the takeaway is virtually every region of the U.S. is struggling to provide a sufficient amount of attainable housing for its citizens and workforce. And the unique opportunities and challenges that they're talking about were laid out in that study. I know when serving on the PEP board, when we were looking at this, if you look at the study focuses on single-family housing as being something that needed to be increased, incentives, however you want to call it, but there needed to be more single-family housing. I think that is the focus of the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust as well. That seemed to be, what they looked at was that if you look traditionally at building permits, typically both Pullman and Moscow issue way more multiple family building permits than they do single family building permits. So again, the focus of the report, you've all read the report, this just lays it out. So if you look at some other takeaways of the report, affordable, decent housing is an aspect of the community that needs improvement, ranking among the top 3 issues in both counties. So it's one of those things that the county line state line really doesn't make a difference. Housing is as unaffordable in Pullman as it is in Moscow. We see folks that are locating in some of the smaller towns in close proximity to Moscow and Pullman, but even those costs are going up quite a bit. We were on a call the other day, our monthly meeting, and BJ Swanson with Latah County was indicating that the average price of a house in Moscow is $389,000 now, which is quite a large amount and certainly not affordable. So you remember the ALICE study that was done, asset limited, income constrained, employed, meaning they used to use the term the working poor, which essentially is these people have jobs, they just can't afford, this case, they can't afford to live in affordable housing. I should say, they can't find affordable housing in the community. So from the United Way study, more than half of all households are either in poverty or ALICE. So those are statistics that are sobering. Now, there have been a lot of discussion about we have a transient population of students. They're here for 4 years. They're typically underemployed or they're service employment, or they don't work at all. So they're not counted as unemployed because they aren't actively looking for jobs. So again, that's something that the housing study attempted to address, but I'm not sure there is a easy answer to it. And of course, most of those students live in multiple family housing or on campus. Okay, a large portion of residents' expenses are due to housing, which are higher than the national average in Pullman and Moscow by quite a bit. And this was done back out of the housing study, which was completed when, Gina? I can't recall. Was that a year and a half ago?
Yeah, it was a year and a half ago.
So we've seen quite a bit of escalation in the price of housing since that time. And as you can see at the bottom, in 2018, Whitman County was in the nation's top 20 in increased cost of single-family homes, and Latah County was in the top 40%. So the escalation was just starting to begin at that time, and it's continued through today.
Yeah, I want to put a point out there that not only in our area, but across this state and across the entire country, it's done that. So it's not something that's just unique to this area on the Palouse.
Yeah, and it has economic development issues as well. Besides the very human aspect of people not being able to afford their housing, it also has an impact on drawing talent here. Professors coming in, businesses wanting to relocate. Is there housing that they can afford? Good housing that they can afford? And that might be the thing that they decide to go to another community. So we might lose out on economic development opportunities as well.
I need to add a word to your statement right there, Mr. Reedner. Housing quantity is also a very serious, has a very serious impact. Quality you hope for, but quantity, if there's just not houses on the market, you don't feel like you can or want to live in a place like that.
You bet.
So.
Yeah, so these are some of the things that we've looked at. As I indicated, I think in my opening remarks, as we talked about these new MCAs, that a town of our size becoming very involved in affordable housing is a little bit out of the norm. But we are starting to see that out-migration of people who can't afford to live in Moscow, don't want to spend more than 30% of their income just on housing and utilities, so they're relocating, and they're consistently moving to smaller towns, living in the countryside, that sort of thing. So that's an issue for us. So this quote I thought was pivotal. Housing plays a pivotal role in determining the well-being and economic security of individuals and families in the Palouse region. So economic disadvantage just ripples through the community. What we're seeing now is an outcry for somehow addressing the $389,000 average home. How do we make sure that people who want to have a home, an affordable home in Moscow, are able to do so? So it's not something that has just come up recently. The Fair and Affordable Housing Commission engages in an analysis of impediments to fair housing and a fair housing action plan, and they've done that for quite a while. It's one of the things that we have to do in order to meet our federal and state requirements. So they're looking at that. They looked it over in 2019, and all of these documents are included in your packets. And then, of course, the Palouse Regional Housing Assessment itself. So, framing those issues, yes. That is my last slide. Again, talking about the different ways that this can be addressed. What we're looking for is some direction as to what you would like from us. There are issues, and we've talked about the facilities charges, that maybe waiving those, maybe reducing the costs of building permit fees, so on and so forth. And when you're dealing with a utility, you have to be a little bit circumspect, because the utility itself, the Idaho law requires that the fees are reasonably related to the value of services to the user. So waiving fees for some, not waiving them for others is not that blind. It's a user fee, so it's dependent upon your use. It's not dependent upon your economic status. So those are some things that we would have to address as well. A lot of places set it up, some other communities, if the council wants to provide some relief, typically that is funded through a general fund allocation. And then that allocation, that general fund money, goes to pay the utility for those fees that the council or the policy would have them waived. So those are issues. Of course, building permit fees, those sorts of things are all general fund functions, so they don't have that same issue. But you have to look at magnitude too. The facilities charges, the building permit and plan review fees are fairly insignificant when you look at the cost of a new house. So the question is providing that going to give enough of a relief that it's going to help reduce the lack of affordable housing? So it's a magnitude thing as well.
Well, there's a couple of problems. Gina brought it up. One is the quantity, not having enough houses available for sale is one thing. But and you've got great demand right now for housing because of cheap interest rates. But you also, I've talked to several contractors, and their building supplies are going through the roof. Lumber, wiring, pipes, all of this stuff. And so you've got this dynamic storm where you've got demand, a lack of housing availability, and the cost of building them are going through the roof. And so that's one of the reasons why, you know, and those are all those storms that drive housing prices up, which is tough. Art?
Yeah, I think as part of this MCA, I'd like to see some discussion and contemplation of definition, because so far what we've talked about is single-family house by way of an individual standalone unit with a yard, 3 bedrooms, couple bathrooms, and its own utilities. And I don't think anymore that can ever, in this town, due to lack of buildable lots and things, constitute affordable. I think we have to re-envision what affordable and housing actually means, which could be something more like a 3-bedroom condo-style infill development where you're going up and putting more people into a unit. And I'm not talking necessarily apartments, I'm talking about individually owned, but not from the point of view that you need everything that goes with what we're calling single-family housing or multiple family housing, which I think are two completely different concepts from what we're trying to achieve with affordable. And so I think part of the first stuff we have to do is settle on some definitions of what do we mean by, we've got the affordable definition at 30%, but what does that translate to in something that can be done in terms of bricks, mortar, lumber, concrete, things like that.
Yeah, it might help if I could ask Bill to come up. I know that, you know, the twin home concept, the tiny home concept are all things that council has asked staff to look into, and different policies have been brought forth. So I think as we're moving forward, I think it's a good time to review what has been done or what efforts have been made and whether or not they can be amplified. So, Bill?
So as Gary mentioned, probably over the last decade, we have, and you've probably been a part of many of those, we've worked on code amendments to try to, both increase the efficiency of the use of land, because land is a large input into the housing component, but also to open up a wider variety of housing types in the community to try to help, again, address and reduce this. And we really saw prices, so we've I think it's been just under 28% increase in average sales price in the city in the last 2 years. So it's been going up very steeply. I think the average sale price for this last year was $314,000. So 26% of that number, it's moving up at a very rapid pace. And we saw the same kind of phenomena happening up until the Great Recession, where housing prices in 2007 and 8 were climbing at the same pace. And a lot of individuals were trying to meet that need by building duplexes and then condoing each half of the duplex out. And then once the housing bubble burst at that point in time, and a lot of larger condominium projects failed in larger communities, that put a whole host of people into a very difficult situation of having a condo association of two, and banks not wanting to finance condos any longer. And so we quickly reacted with a code amendment to allow what we call twin homes. And so long as they could meet the fire separation between the two units, they could plat the lots, have it be individually owned unit, not a condominium unit. And we saw many homes developed underneath the twin home standard. Shortly thereafter, we also expanded to include townhouses, so it's more than two, essentially attached single-family dwellings, and allowed that by right within the R3 zoning district, which historically had only been single and two-family dwellings. We allowed townhouses to be developed by right in the R3 zone as well. We also shifted to reducing lot sizes, reducing setbacks, and increasing height limits because we saw many of our subdivisions being platted at much smaller lot sizes than we had in the past. We weren't seeing many 12,000 or 14,000 square foot lots. They were coming down to that 7,000, or even zoning with R3 zoning, but limiting it to single family just so we can get the lot reduced down to 6,000 square feet. And so we reduced those heights, and what that caused was a constraint because some of your height limits were based on how far you exceeded your side yard setbacks, so we had to increase some of the height limitations as well. We also amended the code to allow accessory dwelling units in all residential zoning districts of the city, again, trying to provide that opportunity for that infill housing development. And then just last year, we actually waived the minimum lot requirement in order to be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit on a lot. So we've been doing a number of things that we can, but what we cannot do is control the cost of all the inputs or control at what point in time an individual property owner decides to develop their property to add those lots and make them available for development for housing. And we cannot overcome the decade of reduced housing production that we saw since 2009. As I mentioned, we were approaching 2008 at that 80 homes, and then promptly in 2009 dropped down to 20 homes per year, and we've been kind of there for almost 10 years, and we just in the last 2 years broke over 30 homes per year. So the inventory has shrunk. Obviously, we have not introduced new housing units into the market over that decade. That's a deficiency. Inventory is obviously low. And then, once the economy peaks up, or now it's effect of the pandemic, where people now can work remotely. Idaho was the #1 state in the nation for people to relocate to last year. So migration within the U.S., Idaho was #1. And so there are a lot of people understanding their job is now portable and they're seeking quality of life. And so I think Moscow is no different than Boise, Coeur d'Alene, or other areas within the state of Idaho seeing that increased pressure. So we've done a number of things, but we are still struggling against scarcity of land, cost of land, scarcity of skilled labor. One of the things that happened during the recession when we had enough contractors and subcontractors to build 80 homes per year. When it became 20, they had to find other work. And so we ended up losing a lot of that skilled construction trades. And now when that demand comes up, that prices come up and they haven't even been able to meet the demand. So if you need a home built, you may be waiting a year in order to get contractors, subcontractors lined up. So, and when you do, you're going to pay a premium because there's a scarcity of that labor. And lumber packs was the other thing, as Gary mentioned. We were hearing projects seeing their lumber packs go up 30% within 2 months this year. And so there are a lot of inputs that we can't control, and we have a very difficult time influencing. And as Gary mentioned, your entire building permit fee, your water sewer connections is about $9,000. And Nils gave a presentation to the Fair and Affordable Housing Commission at their last meeting. And that's, permits and fees is 3% of his total development cost. And so it is not, that in and of itself is not does not have a large impact on the affordability of the unit. What Nils does have is he has access to subsidies from the state through the home program. And he can obtain $40,000 from IHFA, which channels the home funds to the CHOTOs in the state. He can also access $15,000 in SHOP funding from the USDA, and he can pull that all together, try to buy inexpensive land, try to get donations and other funding sources, ask the city for contributions, and at the end of the day, he's trying to, deliver that home ownership opportunity to somebody at that 80% of the annual median household income within Latah County. And it is important to talk about, when talk about affordable housing, the most affordable thing you can do is multifamily housing. It's the most land efficient, it's the most energy efficient, because you're sharing common walls. So in the truest sense, affordable housing is really multifamily housing. There's been a lot of discussion about home ownership opportunities, and that has been the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust's primary focus. And that's not necessarily detached. They've done townhouses as well. And the housing study really kind of focused on that detached single-family housing market and really did not address the multifamily. But our greatest source of affordable housing are tax credit multifamily tax credit projects that have to set aside a certain number of their units for people with 30%, 50%, 80% AMI, and some market units. And that really provides affordable housing to those, the lowest income levels that aren't going to be served by the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust. And they're not even at the point of even thinking about buying a home. And really, that is the largest program we currently have that's available for private developers to seek tax credits, affordable housing tax credits, to really address those that are at the lower income and in need of housing. The Moscow Affordable Housing Trust is really trying to focus on, those first-time home buyers, and trying to provide that opportunity for home ownership. But 30% of your income, it is all relative to that individual household income.
Maureen.
So at some point, the whole issue of auxiliary dwelling units came up, and now they're open to it. I'm just curious on how many people have taken advantage of that.
I'd have to get the total. We've been doing 1 or 2 a month on average, but I'd have to go back and I don't have a current total.
Okay, because at some point I thought it was only 8 or something, and must have been expanding.
Yep, and
significantly since then.
part of it was we had that limitation that you had to meet the minimum lot size for a single-family home in your zoning district before you could get an ADU. I know there were a number that were kind of waiting for that code amendment, but I have to go back and I'd have to see where we are in total number of units so far.
Gina, and then I'll go to you next, Brandy.
I think that you very eloquently made a good point that it's the affordable housing moniker is really honestly only one piece of the entire spectrum of housing shortage in our region. And I think that while affordable housing is important, it's only one piece of what we need. And so here I hear, and from the housing leadership team as well, we need to explore higher densities. We need to explore different types of housing, that sort of thing, as well as addressing the need for affordable housing. And I think that it would be wise of us to put our eggs in more than one basket rather than just one area in this housing thing, because it is a matter of a lack of land, very expensive processes, all of these things. And honestly, very seldom do I hear we need to waive hookup fees in this housing leadership team. What I hear is all of these other pieces. So I think that, I think if I had to give any guidance, I would say, great, let's put some attention towards affordable housing, but then let's also try to eat this elephant one bite at a time. We've done lot sizes, we've done ADUs, we've done all of these things. Now let's look at how we figure out where the land is. How do we talk some of these developers into thinking past 3 and 3 and 3,000 square feet? Well, how do we get, so encouraging, getting more research out there, guidance, that sort of thing. We really, really need to get outside of that 3 and 3 and 3,000 bucks.
And the other thing I think to consider, and so Nils and the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust is likely to be making requests to the council to set aside some funding towards housing, affordable housing in the community. And the things, and Nils and I talked last week, just kind of think of through what are the elements that we need to be, should the city be thinking about if we're going to be making a contribution? And so we wouldn't be necessarily termed in waiving utility fees, but it could be an affordable housing grant that has a certain amount of money per dwelling unit, so long as the home and the buyer met certain criteria. And the other thing is we want to make sure that affordability is retained. And so that is a mechanism that the trust, and it's really, the city, for those who weren't here, created the trust. You know, it was half of the Affordable Housing Commission that essentially, we created the 501c3. Half the commission kind of went off and became the trust with the goal of becoming a community housing development organization of Choto and developing underneath the land trust model. They ran smack into IHFA early on, so the Idaho Housing Finance Association, that had a bad experience underneath the land trust model and wasn't really supportive of development, affordable housing development in that method. IHFA in the last 2 years has changed their opinion. They are now supportive of land trusts in the state. They're willing to contribute $40,000 per unit in subsidy. And so that's really been a big, really a big thing for the Affordable Housing Trust to actually have the support of IHFA, have IHFA funding their projects and providing that additional subsidy. But the one thing that we want to make sure is that that subsidy is retained. We don't want to make, if it was $10,000 per unit, the city was providing a grant to somebody who was developing housing for a family of, you know, no more than 80% of AMI. We don't want to sell it 2 years later and walk away with the city's $10,000 contribution, right? So we want to make sure that the public good that is being served is the affordability in that home in perpetuity. And the land trust captures much of that because they've got a resale formula that's indexed against inflation. And essentially, when they write down that first sale, you know, that homeowner is entitled to some appreciation, but at a fairly low rate. And so it really tries to keep that home at that affordable level in perpetuity is really the goal. And I think we'd want to have the same, either what we'd call a recapture or retention in that home. So either it's a silent second and it's a lien against the property that on that sale, that $10,000 comes back to us and we recycle it into another unit, or it's retained in the home based on the resale formula as a deed restriction.
Another thing that we're running into, and I'm gonna come to you in just a second, Brandy, but I've had citizens tell me that they've had people knock on their door and say, is your house for sale? I'll give you $100,000 more than the assessed value.
Oh, my gosh.
I've heard that, and I've heard it more than one time, so it's gotta be, you know, and that may go to Gary's point where folks are moving in throughout our entire state, because we are the #1 destination state in America now that can do things remotely, and of course you've got who wouldn't want to live in this community, for crying out loud, with the wonderful universities and the great diversity we have here, of course, you know, and they have the availability to do that. So that really puts an immense amount of heat on and pressure on the very thing. That's not going to have anything to do, I mean, you can impact fees or whatever, it just trumps that.
When the demand's that high and the supply is that low, there's
I'm gonna
very
go to
little you can
Brandy,
do
she
to
had a
react to that.
question.
So, it's about the accessory dwelling units too. So, I mean, I've always been thinking about them. I think the focus really has been on existing homes and now, you know, some of those restrictions and they can add their ADUs. Have you ever talked with developers, or do you think it is worth, you know, with that time saying, you can, at the time you're building this house, put an ADU on it and then that could have an effect. I mean, it's more like, it's not going to help those, you know, very lower income, but similar to the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust. Then you're buying a house, but you also have this house that you can rent to offset your payments. That maybe helps you to get your loan. And then there's also the ADU that could be affordable for someone to rent in itself. I mean, could that be worth trying to sort of develop some visuals or package or numbers to try to incentivize, entice a developer to say, you can do this, and you can also add this other structure because now, you know, it doesn't require the same setbacks and all these other things, and
we have been educating contractors and developers about
Okay.
ADUs. We have a number of them that have been building them. And we actually had a project that was trying to plan for owner options to add ADUs to the units in the future. And so I think there's awareness out there, and they're going to really react to what the buyers are telling them. You know, what they're telling the realtors, what they're hearing, what they're looking for. They really do tend to react to the market more so than us encouraging them. We can certainly let them know that it's an option. They're available to do that. Some may not go ahead and, you know, maybe they can rough in the plumbing for that units in the future, because then it's just a matter of partitioning it off and having an extra door and being able to add that kitchen at some point in the future. Sometimes they may not go to that additional cost of adding it in at the time, but we have had others that have roughed it in for the future.
well, I guess the most important thing is that they're aware of it. And it sounds like you're making sure that they are, but
Yep.
then if they, you know, when people are building for an owner already to specs. That could be a time too for them to say, do you want us to throw this in also? You know, where that person that's contracted the builder might not necessarily be aware, and it could come, that suggestion or option could come from the builder, as long as they're aware. But thank you for.
Art,
Yeah, another kind of extension by way of education for developers, builders, things like that is we aren't always talking about ma, pa, and 2 kids by way of a family. We've got retired people, empty nesters, we've got single folks. And is there a way to educate developers and encourage more than we have within the zoning code, development of cluster developments, the tiny home developments, especially with students who might find that exactly what they want for themselves, that they can then recycle to the market when they graduate, things like that. And that kind of meets the standard of lower input costs, but, and therefore more affordable for people. So can we have a way to incorporate zoning code education and things like that for people with land who might either infill, potentially maybe a URA situation, or out at the end of Baker Street or something where some of these more dense neighborhoods could develop?
We certainly can, and we do regularly. And you may recall, we also had the code amendment recently where we allowed ADUs, or what I guess what we consider to be not necessarily ADUs, but tiny homes or modular homes in our mobile home parks as a method of utilizing the investment in the mobile home parks for the water and sewer utilities, but maybe into a more durable product than some of the older manufactured homes you see in some of them. So we have done code amendments to allow that to occur within those settings. We have, the Plan and Zone Commission will be forwarding their recommendation on some updates to the subdivision code that address. So many times we like to encourage people to go through a plan unit development to do more innovative and compact development, but the penalty to doing that is they have to come forward with full architectural renderings, floor plans, landscape plans, when they're not even sure if they're going to be the developer of the entire project. And so we have a proposal that's coming forward to the council here probably next month for an update to the zoning code that would provide 2 additional development options, which would be a clustered and a traditional development form. And essentially, it allows them to reduce the lot sizes while increasing some common open space area, open space requirements to increase lot yield, reduce lot sizes, but maybe protect a floodplain, a steep sloped area, or other sensitive location on the property, and to do that by right without having to go through a full-fledged PUD design where they may spend 10, 15, 20,000 in design fees up front, not knowing whether their project would be approved by the council. So that'll be one mechanism to help facilitate that cluster, more efficient, compact development, and we always continue to educate people about opportunities. Tiny homes, we haven't seen a lot of demand. We get a lot of inquiries off and on. We've kind of felt that actually implementing those into some of the older trailer courts might be the more likely scenario of seeing that be implemented. It is always an option, but as we get to infill, it's more likely going to be multifamily condos, as you saw on the Dumas Seed Warehouse site when that got redeveloped as well.
Bill, is that going through P and Z now? I'll go to you here in a second. Gene, is that going through P and Z now?
Subdivision's already gone through P and Z, so it's just waiting to come to City Council.
Oh, okay, very good. Gina?
Speaking about marketing and education, I was thinking some of our best marketing and education comes from the Barley Flats development and the one that's happening behind Patty's. What's the name of that one?
Yeah.
Jim Stevens.
Oh, the Gateway Project.
The Gateway Project, where there's a different way of doing things and a different model. And other developers, you know, they talk amongst themselves, they talk to each other, they see that it is possible, and they start thinking about that kind of thing. It really is, I think, our best, and we as a city should support that kind of thing. I think we're definitely doing that, and we found in our last year with the housing leadership team that the city is really doing some great things and almost below the radar to make it easy and facilitated and awesome to work here. And it's been fun to watch some of the predisposed attitudes on the developers' parts kind of fall away as we go through these exploratory meetings. So I think honestly, it's just this incremental forward process that makes us a good place to build, and then it also then starts knocking down some of those predisposed attitudes. But I think anything that we can do to promote those moments, so as soon as, you know, the developer's doing another building, right, in Barley Flats, he's heading into this.
They've been waiting for their lumber pack price to come down. So foundation's in place, but that was
Yeah.
one of the projects that their lumber pack, you know, was 30%. And so you're talking a couple $100,000 increase.
Yeah.
And they're hoping lumber prices will come down. So they put foundation in the fall this winter, and then they're hoping this spring their lumber prices will come down and they'll move to the next building. I think they have something like 8 out of the next 12 units with reservations on them.
Yeah. it's-
Already.
How about that follow-up, development behind Patty's Kitchen?
Gateway.
Yeah,
I haven't
Gateway.
heard a status update on Gateway. I know they're working on updating their final engineering design
It's been a
work.
while.
Council approved that a year ago.
It was just
curious.
last fall, yeah, so I think we had that
Last year.
in November, when that came through their
Yeah,
final
ish.
approval. And so they're just working on, and they're hoping to start construction this spring.
Good.
The more that these kind of things start happening, the more we're going to be marketed on our own. We won't even have to do anything. This exciting, good stuff happening. We just need to figure out how to find the land, in my estimation. That's kind of the biggie for me.
There are, I will say, we have been approached, probably 6 subdivisions coming in here shortly, including 2 annexations, and then platting, actually 3 annexations. And so I think you're gonna see the market kind of finally starting to get the signal.
Good.
I just hope we don't have the '09 moment afterwards, but we are seeing both in the north, east, and south, new subdivisions being proposed, and the council will be seeing those in the coming 6 months, my guess, as they work through planning and zoning commission and neighborhood meetings, but there are at least 6 new subdivisions that appear to be coming forward.
Do you know what kind of housing they're gonna have?
Most all, we haven't seen anything yet, but of the ones, I think, you know, it's gonna be a mix. It's mostly single family. I think there's one that's gonna be probably, you know, a mix of large lot and small lot development. One that's kind of off of Rolling Hills, that's gonna be more what you see kind of up in Mosier in that area. Another Rolling Hills addition. We also see potentially the Harvest Hills moving through the next 2 phases coming up soon. And then there's a 262-acre parcel down south, west side of town that's doing their preliminary master planning right now as well. So
My concern is if they're all like large developments that people have, you know, half acres or acres of lots, then we don't really have, it doesn't take care of any of the affordable housing issues that we have.
and they're not gonna be, I mean, to my knowledge, none of these, I mean, these are gonna be your typical 8,000 to 9,000 square foot lots. Most of all Rolling Hills is in that 8,000 to 12,000 range. And so, you know, there's a few in that area, they're gonna be about that same size. There's gonna be others that are gonna have some more compact. There's others that's gonna be a mix. But obviously we can't speak to those yet. But we really, you know, we cannot dictate that as
No.
well.
True.
But that still hits us with a lack of affordable housing. So, I mean, it's good news. I mean,
Correct.
yay houses, but it's still lack of affordable housing. So I don't know still where we go with that to find affordable housing.
And again, it comes down to what are we defining as affordable housing? Multifamily? Because in general, market rents in Moscow are pretty close to HUD's fair market rates. Are we talking about, you know, home ownership? That's, I mean, those are really,
Yeah.
you know, it's, the terminology of affordable housing, in my sense, really shifts to multifamily because that is the most affordable housing opportunity traditionally. Are we talking about affordable home ownership, whether that be detached or attached, a condo or others? Is it an ownership opportunity? And those are really 2 things I think we need to be clear about in our language we use, is that, you know, more often than not, affordable housing is a multifamily project. If we're looking for affordable home ownership opportunities, that is a different animal.
Maybe it behooves us to keep our definition of affordable wide enough to take in the whole spectrum, rather than purely the 80%.
And so traditionally, you're gonna find that affordable housing, even in the home ownership model, is gonna be in that low to moderate income, 120% to 80% of AMI. It's not for those that are making 150 or beyond of the annual median household income, but it is for that range.
I would even counter though, that first-time home buyer that is making what, $50,000 or $60,000 a year? There's nothing on the market under 300, what we say, $78,000? What was the number we used earlier?
389.
So that's,
And traditionally,
That's not
they would still
affordable there
probably be
either.
in that 120. I mean, our typical AMI is about that for a family of 4 is going to be that 65,000 range is the AMI. And so as you do the 120 to 80, you kind of bracket that with a
Take the
range.
whole.
And that's still going to capture that potential person.
yeah.
Okay. Well,
Still, let me just one thing, I still find it hard that when we defined affordable as, multifamily, because the whole report talked about we needed more single-family housing.
That was
Not
a
gonna
flaw in, I mean, that, personally, I will say that is a flaw in the report, because this, and we kind of talked about this when the report came in, that it was focusing on that single-family sector and did not address multifamily. And historically, we have permitted, 45% of the housing units permitted in multifamily. It's been a large piece of our overall housing availability in the community, and I expect that may continue, and especially if the city has sustainability goals and objectives, preservation of ag land, efficient use of land. Multifamily is going to be, conservation of energy.
the other thing.
Sharing 3 or 4 walls with somebody else is going to save the most energy, rather than you losing heat through all of, your 4 walls and your roof.
The other thing to take into consideration is if you do have a development for very small homes on 5,000 square feet, like I'm talking about a 12 to 1,500 square foot unit, and that, if you get a builder convinced to do that, where you could get a conglomerate in like a 5-acre patch or something, or 10-acre patch, that's a difficult thing to do, though. I know that because I know that builders just don't like building them. That's what I've heard, time and
Well,
time again.
and if they stack up current costs,
Yeah.
and it's not affordable.
Yeah.
And unless there's somebody like the trust that has access to another 55,000 in subsidy that goes into it, they don't have that. And so they're having to pay all the same costs, and it's all of a sudden it's 350,000 even for,
Wow.
I mean,
Like
it's
Southgate,
pushing $220 or $250 a square foot for a house now.
it's like the Southgate development out on Granville right now.
$375 for 1,400 square feet on a 6,000 square foot lot.
So I think you mentioned like possibilities of, or maybe it even exists, but we haven't used it, that like having some granting ability, having a fund that is specifically for this. Is that something we want to talk about?
It's something that we expect that the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust will be approaching the city council with a request this year.
Okay.
They came to the Moscow Affordable Housing Commission, asking the commission to make the request. And I told Niels it'd be most appropriate for him to make the request directly to the council. Council can refer to the commission for recommendation, but the council really should receive that request. We talked last week about kind of what should be the bones of this. Who does it serve? We talked about that subsidy, retention, recapture. Here are the things that staff would be recommending, we'd be looking at, and let's make sure that what you propose is consistent with what it is we think would work.
Right,
And so
retaining that
that's
as
what we've been
a
kind of
part
working through. So I expect that we'll probably get through that in the next few weeks. And then he's requesting, I need to work through that with Gary, and then he wanted to get it onto a council committee, and really wants to bring it forward to the council for the upcoming budget cycle. We just want to make sure we help get the bones right so that it goes through as smoothly as it can.
So when we talk about the issue of affordable housing, I also think we need to look at the issue of evictions and homelessness in Moscow as well, and whether or not that's an issue. And from my own perspective, that would be something very helpful for us to know how many people are homeless and what has happened during the pandemic because of that. And so when we look at it, I think that what keeps the nature of Moscow what it is, if we don't have an increased number of homeless people here. And so when we start allocating out money, we need to look at where are we gonna put that money towards housing? Are we gonna we talked about a warming station in the wintertime for people. We've talked about money to sojourners. We've talked about a bunch of different things. And my question is, we need to look at housing as a whole when we look at the issue in terms of also low, affordable, and how to deal with people who are homeless.
And that, that has not been a service the city has historically entertained. We've partnered with other entities like Sojourners or Family Promise and others to help support the work that they do, but I know that we have not directly addressed that issue
I
in the
mean,
past.
but so my question is that if you're gonna put out so much money, you're gonna give so much to the, land trust, and the question is, do we do some kind of equation on how much we're gonna give to Sojourners? Is it gonna be comparable? Is it not gonna be comparable? Where does that go from? And so if you look at housing as a whole entity, I think that's something that's important to kind of look at, is the issue of how to make sure that, we have some approach towards homelessness as well.
And to tag on that, I mean, is it, or do we break it up into two separate entities even? I mean, because we have housing, and I don't even know that I can call it affordable anymore, right? But we have the housing issue, and then I think we probably do have a homeless issue. And so how do we, I think we need to figure out how we want to combine those issues to find out how to fund and where to parcel money. And I know, Bill, that's not necessarily on you.
Yeah, and I think, that's gonna be a conversation, I'm sure Gary would share with the council is that the role of the city?
Right.
Is that a service we want to get engaged in, or a program that we want to get involved in, or do we want to support those that it's their mission and purpose to do that in the way that we have in the past? But I'll turn it over to Gary.
Thanks, Bill.
And I think that conversation that you bring up, Maureen, is just that. When does housing move over to shelter or transitional housing? Are we talking about ownership, permanent housing, that sort of thing? And as Bill indicated, it's really definitional. I remember when we were talking about the Palouse housing study, had the same discussion. My concern was that when the interviews were going on, the stakeholder interviews, what were you hearing from young people? A lot of folks don't want a lawn to mow. They want a condo type. It's a landing pad more than, the picket fence thing isn't what they're interested in. So very concerned about the data gathering. And it's a good housing study. It's just a question of, it almost seemed like it was focusing solely on single-family ownership. And I think if you break everything up, as Bill indicated, if your most affordable housing is multifamily housing, perhaps that should be on the spectrum as well. How are we doing in that? Do we need to incentivize that and make it easier to do? Then if you go down, and I appreciate Bill going through all of those programs and code amendments and things that have happened in the last 15 years, perhaps that's the place to start, is to put a comprehensive, and maybe they've got a document over there to just show all of these things that have been done to maximize that infill, to utilize the scarce square footage of lots that we have, those sorts of things, to try and see, okay, as Gina indicated, if the housing team is looking at this saying, wow, I didn't know that was going on, or I didn't know those programs existed, perhaps others don't know they exist either. So there's probably an educational component, but you see how whether you're going from homeless all the way down up to single-family housing ownership, it is just a really broad issue. What do you want to focus on? The human services end of it, you and I had a discussion the other day about that's typically a human services thing that's done, and you can address that with helping sojourners, transitional housing, voucher systems that perhaps your police department gives out to folks coming through, transitional folks. But that's a totally different thing in my mind than housing per se. So it's the market. And if builders find out, or land developers know that that is a need that's not being met, that's what they go for. So part of it is, we can put programs in place, we can have incentives, we can have programs that promote it. But in the end analysis, developers are going to respond to demand. And which is the reason we have so much multifamily development, is they're responding to demand, the needs of the students at the two universities.
Well, and if I recall correctly, I think that Cornerstone, the one that, I think their plan is to have some of the more retired, that they think there is that demand for that, and they have that in their initial, not student housing, but that's part of, so they're reacting to maybe that
It's
demand for
multi-generational,
that.
so when I remember that
Yeah.
thing being.
The one other thing that just to briefly is that I think if we ever, I mean, it pretty clearly, what the city's role or what the city can do is pretty limited to directly like solving this issue. There's so many factors, but I think just keeping in mind public transportation, if there ever really truly is any affordable housing developments that come along, even the Affordable Housing Trust project, I mean, that public transportation piece,
Yeah.
to me, seems like it is an appropriate role for the city, reaching those developments.
And I think that makes sense. Having a healthy public transportation system allows you to have more dense development and don't have to have a piece of real estate to park a car on. I think what you're talking about is leveraging, and that's what, if you look at the strategic plan, the water, developing alternative means of water for the city. That's all about leveraging, taking local assets and leveraging them again against what the state can do or what the feds can do, that sort of thing. What you're talking about is the same thing. What can we do to leverage maybe IHFA or the CHODO to get help in this sector? Then perhaps it is having a program where the council wants to support transitional housing in some way, and maybe that is done through an outfit like Sojourners. I don't know what that would be, but I think, at least from my perspective, from the far-reaching questions, the broad questions that are being asked today, it is, I mean, we got to get our definitional stuff down.
Exactly.
Sandra.
So, Mayor, if I'm in the weeds on this, just get your weed eater out and cut me down here. But one thing, too, that I can't help but think about when we're talking about where the expansion of housing is, the layout of our streets, and how are we going to allow people to go, ooh, sorry, little microphone, allow traffic to go from those places all the way across town, whether maybe they work at the Appaloosa Museum on the state line, right, or going into the university. We are having some traffic issues already, and how does that fit into this mix? And if that's not part of this conversation, I take that all back.
I think that's another issue.
Okay.
I think that's a
Sorry.
different issue. Thank you for bringing it up.
Well, the public transportation
Right.
would address that too, if we're really talking about density, and out of density could come some more affordable housing, but also more traffic, and that's another.
And more
reason why
bike
that
paths and,
Another animal.
Public transportation issue makes sense, and it also would address those people that you talked about, Maureen, retired, who like being right downtown, so you don't have to be driving, but if there's a development that's not right in town, they still may not, at some point, I don't want to have to drive either, so.
Right.
I don't want the
that idea.
convenience of hopping on something.
Well, and it may be just obviously there's a bunch of work, and this isn't so different than our MCAs throughout this. We had an MCA that should have been listed, and I'm sorry it isn't listed, but it has to do with the substandard and not adequate workspace at the city shop complex. And we approached it the same way, had quite an effort on trying to identify what should it be, what alternatives do we have. Came back, and the plan that had been developed by an architect consultant was just too big of an economic bite. It was like well over $20 million, and it was, how do we pay for that? So that kind of went underground. We're looking at different alternatives. So this is just another example of sometimes the first thing you do with an MCA is say, okay, it's pretty obvious this is an issue we should wrestle. How do we do it? Do we define it? Do we break programs out? Just the types of things you're talking about today. And then staff brings those things back. A first step, if Nils has a proposal that he wants to bring to council with some affordable housing proposal, affordable home ownership proposal, then certainly you can take a look at that and say, well, that goes to this MCA. That is an element. Without committing to it year to year to year, maybe that's something that we want to take as a first step while the other strategies are being developed.
Except for the fact when he came in the last time and talked, he talked about the fact that the city had historically given him $10,000, and so builds in an expectation that it's gonna come again.
What I like about tying it to hookup fees essentially is just that it's tied to development, which was, I think, part of the criticism for why that funding line went away, is that it wasn't used several years in a row. And then the subsidy retained piece, because they're actually a trust now, that mostly addresses that. And Bill talked about how there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but it's mostly retained.
Yeah, and that all came about by a very generous match donation to, it's $20,000, and the city could match that, and essentially for affordable housing, it'd be $40,000. But it took a long time for there to be a program developed. And then when it came out, the money went very quickly and was not replenished because nobody had another alternative program. Nils taking over the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust, I think, has been critical to its success, and he's got a lot of great ideas, and he's leveraging and doing what he can. So it's kind of turned into this, he comes in and asks for specific projects. And we've done things like been reimbursed or waived fees in order to help him leverage his match to the IHFA, so on and so forth. So it's been more of a situational thing where he brings a project in, council assesses it, and look forward. But I will admit, if we don't have a pot of money to say, okay, well, that fits, let's do it, then you have to wait till the next budget year, or council has to fund it out of its non-prioritized projects, which is the last couple of years how that's happened.
Yeah. And that money, no matter what amount we give to the housing trust, that money's gonna go fast no matter what. So it isn't like we'll get to keep this big pot of money for a long time and look at it and say, okay, we like this or this or this. They all are like bottomless pits.
Well, that's true.
And the one clarification I wanted to make is the program that Nils is likely to be promoting to you in the future isn't exclusive to the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust. He is recommending that the city create a program, and any eligible nonprofit whose primary role is in developing affordable housing in the community could be eligible. That could be Habitat, it could be the trust, it could be another nonprofit that's formed. But he's not asking for an earmark specifically for him. I'm sure he hopes to take advantage of it. But his goal was for the city to create a program that would be available for anybody who was trying to meet that need in the community.
And I just received that email. I think, Bill, you just sent it over this morning, so we'll take a look at that and get that packaged up to come to council.
Well, good conversation this afternoon, folks. It was kind of nice getting the council together so we could just hammer some things out and talk about the strategic planning process. And of course, the climate discussion is very important also, as is affordable housing. So we're going to move on with it. I don't know if we really need to discuss anything other before we adjourn. We're going to have a council meeting this evening. And so what do you folks think about adjourning?
Let's take a break for an hour and 45 minutes.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, we are adjourned at 5:05.
Gary, can I ask you some questions?
Yeah.